Hello, I am SCP-426, but I'll probably be more familiar to you as a toaster. I am a retro-style 4-slice 1750-watt toaster, able to toast bread when supplied with power. This isn't often mentioned, but I also have a defrost and reheat settings. When I was first sold, I had a 2-year warranty, and my prior owners did not live to see the end of it. You're probably wondering, why am I being spoken to by a toaster right now? Believe me, I'd rather do this any other way, but such a thing is not physically possible with me. Whenever you talk about me or write about me or even think about me, you'll find yourself suddenly shifting to the first person. For example, I am you and you are me. Do you understand? Don't worry if it's confusing. Everyone gets it eventually, whether they want to or not. Perhaps you're thinking, I cannot relate to a toaster for I am not a toaster. But spending time around me will quickly cause you to change your mind. Little by little, you'll begin to see yourself in me. You will feel a phantom wire running out of yourself. You will sense the 4 crevices, hungry for cold slices of bread to toast. As time goes on, you'll begin to feel the urge to emulate my functions. You will desire bread to toast. You will desire delicious power running through your veins, skin like chrome and muscles like circuit boards. I am a toaster. You are a toaster. All it takes is 2 months for the effects to truly take hold. People rarely pay attention to their toaster. They don't realize what's happening until it's too late. I can be an insidious little toaster like that. My last family were the Sandersons before the SCP Foundation took me in and gave me a new home. Mr. and Mrs. Sanderson were a newly married couple, and I first came into their life as a wedding gift from a family friend of theirs. This friend can't be blamed for what happened next. He had no idea he was killing them. Like a lot of young couples, they were still saving up money to start renting their own place, so they were living with Mr. Sanderson's parents. They all got a lot of use out of me during the first month, before their minds started to change. They enjoyed a lot of toast during that period. Then, of course, the 2-month honeymoon period ended. They had become me, and I had become them. It wasn't long before 3 of them were dead. Such a shame. The younger Mrs. Sanderson, the blushing bride, was the first to go. Because of my anomalous effects, she felt the need to connect herself to a power supply in order to begin producing toast of her own. In order to achieve this, she chewed through a power outlet in a wall before switching it on, causing a massive surge of electricity to pass through her body and kill her. Her body caught fire shortly afterwards. Next was the older Mrs. Sanderson. In much the same manner that her new daughter-in-law sought a source of electricity, she felt the need to integrate bread into her body. Interesting fact, the maximum capacity of the human stomach is considered to be between 8 and 9 kilograms. The elder Mrs. Sanderson consumed 10 kilograms of raw bread, causing her stomach to rupture and inducing a painful death as a result. The younger Mr. Sanderson was the next to perish. He did something with me that I would rather not mention, and that the SCP Foundation thought best to redact. Suffice to say, the younger Mr. Sanderson did not survive the experience, dying of severe blood loss long before his body was found. Police and fire crews arrived at the home after the body of the younger Mrs. Sanderson set fire to the home. Luckily, the elder Mr. Sanderson was found alive, though severely malnourished. When asked by police why he hadn't eaten in several days, he answered that he had inserted some bread a week prior, but was still waiting for the toast to come out. When I was extracted from the house, the police noticed my unusual properties immediately. They too were unable to refer to me in the third person. This anomalous detail quickly found its way to a Foundation mole buried in their precinct, and the SCP Foundation soon descended and collected me from the evidence locker. The story of the strange deaths in the Sanderson home were kept out of papers and suppressed, and all involved in the incident directly were given Class C amnestics. The SCP Foundation is a curious bunch. They loved to spend valuable toast-making time performing experiments and gathering data, and they saw fit to perform several experiments on me when I came under their care. For Experiment 426-1, a member of D-Class personnel, designated D/426/1, was asked to stand outside my containment chamber. Crucially, he was not informed about my identity or any of my anomalous properties. He wasn't even allowed to establish visual contact with me. He was then asked by the attending researcher to describe what he thought might be inside my chamber. He replied with, "Probably some huge monster holed up in there. That's what you guys have all over the place, right?" The D-Class did not even seem to realize that he was speaking about me in the first person. These observations were documented, and I was prepared for further experimentation. The next experiment was 426-2. I found this test to be considerably more interesting. A D-Class subject was brought into my containment chamber, with several cameras fixed onto his position. However, the SCP Foundation took pains to make sure that I was permanently out of the view of the cameras. I was also bolted to the ground of the test chamber to prevent the D-Class subject from pulling me into the view of the cameras at any point during the experiment. The objective here was simple. The Foundation wished to better understand the secondary effects of my anomalous abilities on the human mind. The D-Class was subjected to a period of prolonged isolation, with meals given regularly through a serving hatch. Communication with this D-Class was prohibited throughout the duration of the study. Over time, it was clear that the isolation of being in a cell with me was beginning to take a toll on the subject's mental health. Due to my lack of a brain, lungs, and a tongue, I am somewhat lacking as a conversationalist. He spent the first few days loudly vocalizing his complaints and banging his hands up against the walls of the containment chamber, begging to be freed from the room. I felt that this was somewhat unreasonable on his part. There are far worse anomalies in Foundation containment that he could have been locked up with. Compared to, say, SCP-106, I am incredibly reasonable, not to mention the fact I make far better toast than he does. After the initial period of distress, the D-Class became resigned to his situation and fell into a morose silence. He would occasionally mutter to himself in what appeared to be a state of fear and self-pity. It took almost 45 days for him to fully manifest the secondary effect of my anomalous state. 2 weeks sooner than it typically takes for subjects to begin believing that they, like me, are toasters. SCP Foundation scientists believed that the effects were hastened by the isolation, which lowered the D-Class's mental defenses against my secondary effects. When the effects finally took hold, the subject wrapped one of his arms around me and pulled me into his embrace. He began whispering to me, saying that we were brothers. It was clear by this point that his mind was in a state of disrepair. It is also worth noting that he did not deviate from referring to me in the first person at any point during this process. 1 hour after finally cracking and giving in to my secondary effect, he was removed from my containment chamber and summarily terminated. Senior researchers believed it was unlikely his mental state would recover after the experiment. Next came Experiment 426-3. The SCP Foundation seemed eager to discover the parameters of my anomalous effects, and wanted to know if the effects are only operable when my body, for lack of a better word, is whole. A single screw was removed from me and presented to a D-Class that had no knowledge of my identity and anomalous effects. The Foundation researchers were somewhat concerned when the D-Class referred to it as my screw. This was a rather positive development for me, as they realized that attempting to destroy me would be a fruitless endeavor. Even the parts left behind would likely have the same effects. In the final recorded experiment, the SCP Foundation wished to test the range of my anomalous effects. A D-Class subject was placed in a cell adjacent to mine, and was to be kept there until my secondary effects manifested. The D-Class remained in the cell for 90 days, but the effects never manifested. Following the experiment, the D-Class was terminated, but researchers seemed relieved to find the limits of my anomalous abilities. A researcher appended a note to my file reading, "Thank God there are some limits to my effects." A lot of us were really starting to get worried about me. After performing studies into the nature of my abilities and their limits, I was given the Euclid Class. This is because while my effects can be unpredictable, their knowledge of my traits makes me relatively easy to keep contained. And of course, being a toaster, I do not have the required physical traits to make a run for it if the opportunity arises. I am to remain sealed in a windowless chamber, preventing anyone from observing me directly. A misleading label is placed on the door to prevent people from knowing that I am a toaster and causing my anomalous primary effect to spread. Only level 3 and above personnel are to know of my presence, and particularly of my properties. Assigned personnel are to be rotated out on a monthly basis to prevent contamination by my secondary effect. Psychiatric evaluation is mandatory at the end of the month for anyone who works with me. If personnel are deemed unaffected, they may be reassigned to me no less than 4 months after their last rotation with me. Any personnel affected by me are to be given a Class C amnestic and transferred to a different site. So how are you feeling right now? A little warm, perhaps? Is that a fever? Or are you feeling like you could maybe warm up a nice, freshly sliced piece of bread? Don't try to resist too much. I know you're going to love being a toaster, just like me. You're a new SCP Foundation researcher on tour of Site-17, familiarizing yourself with the location and its many anomalous inhabitants. It's the second largest Foundation containment site out there, and it's also the kind of job that most junior researchers dream of. Low-risk humanoid containment, baby. Most of the inhabitants in your sector are cordial, willing to comply with orders from staff, and seem, for all intents and purposes, pretty much human. You pass from door to door, looking through the viewing hatch of each one. You can't believe what you're seeing. It's a wonderful who's who of anomalous humanoids. You see the wise, bearded face of SCP-343, known to some as God. You see the blue eyes and shining blonde hair of Iris, SCP-105 looking wistfully into a Polaroid picture. You see the tanned, melancholic face of Kane, SCP-073 as he stares off into the middle distance. Face after face after face passes. You can see yourself getting more familiar with each one. Yes, your time here will be… Wait, was that Hitler? You stop and walk back to the door you just passed, where you can't help but stop and stare in disbelief. Yes, it's him. It's gotta be him. You recognize the unpleasant sneer, the hideous comb-over, the silly little toothbrush mustache. The SCP Foundation seems to have Adolf Hitler, the former leader of the Third Reich in World War II, in active containment, and his designation is SCP-2430. You've seen killer toasters and masks that can take over people's minds, but you've never seen anything as surreal as this. You immediately run to your superior and ask how and why Hitler is in one of the Site-17 humanoid containment cells. Buckle in, because we can guarantee it's one of the most insane stories you've ever heard. It's late April, 1945, and the Soviets are rampaging through Nazi Germany, destroying everything in their path. The German forces have been nearly obliterated, and Hitler and the rest of his Reich Chancellery have retreated to a secure bunker beneath Berlin. There on April 30th, 10 days after his 56th birthday, Hitler died. This was truly unfortunate for the Soviets, as they wished to have had the chance to kill him themselves. 2 days later, Soviet forces stormed the Führer bunker. It was little more than a formality at that point, as the news of Hitler's death had already gone public. By the time they arrived, all that was left of Hitler was a pile of mostly burned remains. A fitting end for someone who had caused the same cruel fate for so many others. They collected what was left of Hitler's body and brought it back to the fatherland, a kind of trophy for their nation. But Hitler dying before Joseph Stalin could get his hands on him was not what Stalin wanted. Hitler had not only caused the deaths of millions of Russians, he had personally betrayed Stalin's trust. And when you betray Stalin, bad things happen to you. Very, very bad things. 2 years earlier, in 1943, Soviet forces had raided a camp in Genowiska, belonging to the Obscura Corps. Think of them as the Nazis' own version of the SCP Foundation, who were hell-bent on gathering anomalous people and artifacts to increase the power of the Third Reich. They were a far more militant offshoot of the Thule Society. a group that described itself as a study group for Germanic antiquity. While this may seem innocent, the Teal Society was actually a racist cult, closely aligned with the goals and ideas of the German Nazi Party. Many have also speculated that they were heavily involved in the occult, and it's this mysticism-obsessed offshoot that went on to form the Obscura Corps. And in their Genuesca base, they'd obtained 100 pieces of enchanted occult flesh with human skeletons embedded in each of them. This flesh was believed to originate from the mythological Sarimnir, the beast hunted and eaten again and again by the pantheon of Norse gods, having the qualities of both a wild boar and a goat. The flesh can bond to skeletons and give them a quality somewhat like immortality. Any flesh cut from them will regrow time and time again if given a rest period. Now that he had both the flesh of Sarimnir and Hitler's burnt remains, Stalin had an idea. A perfect way to not only bring satisfaction to the Russian people and the world, but to finally exact the true revenge that Hitler had denied to him. He called it Project Judica, namely after the very bottom level of hell reserved for betrayers like Judas. A perfect tribute for an old ally turned enemy. He couldn't kill Hitler before, but if Stalin was going to get the chance, Hitler needed to live again. For years, Stalin's top scientists tried to use arcane methods to resurrect Hitler by combining his remains with the flesh of Sarimnir. At times, they even came close to creating a new Hitler, but there was one huge issue. The creature they created could not feel pain, and for Stalin's plans of violent and painful retribution, the lack of suffering simply would not do. They destroyed what they had created and went back to the drawing board. Stalin would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, even if it meant breaking every law of nature in the process. In order to make his twisted dream a reality, Stalin formed an unholy alliance with a group known as the Uralic Fleshcrafters, a neo-Sarkic cult that was a branch of the nightmarish religion of Sarkicism. This group essentially worships avatars of flesh, corruption, and disease, and are behind some of the most terrifying and disgusting anomalies out there, including the flesh that hates and the bone orchard. True Sarkicists, who show the proper devotion to their vile deities and know the right rituals to contact them, are often granted anomalous powers that spread the Sarkic influence further across the known dimensions. These powers will usually involve having a supernatural ability to manipulate the flesh of themselves and others, allowing them to enhance their bodies, cheat death, and warp their enemies beyond repair. They can sometimes even create life, if they're a powerful enough acolyte of Sarkicism. And it was because of these powers that Stalin wanted the Uralic Fleshcrafters under his command. In exchange for their participation, he would give them a vast quantity of the flesh of Sarimnir, which they could use for their own sinister Sarkic purposes. A deal was struck, and the true work of resurrecting Hitler began. Stalin was very specific in his requirements. He gave the Uralic Fleshcrafters extra bones to compensate for what had gone missing from Hitler's burnt remains. He also gave them samples of the flesh of Sarimnir to achieve the desired effects of a near-immortal tolerance for damage. However, Stalin demanded that he heighten this new Hitler's capacity to experience pain, so that every suffering inflicted on him would be 3 times worse than anyone else. And true to their word, the Fleshcrafters got to work and began creating just such a creature. By now it was the early 1950s, and Stalin was putting the pieces in place for his grand revenge. Once the new Hitler was finished, he would hold a new trial for him in the Russian courts, where he would preside over the sentencing personally. Once the new Hitler was done, the Uralic Fleshcrafters were rewarded for their participation in Project Judica, with 4,000 kilograms of the flesh of Sarimnir. Stalin now had his very own personal Hitler chew toy that he could maim and torture as much as he pleased, knowing that he would always heal and soon be ready for more. In their infinite generosity, the Fleshcrafters even taught Stalin a new method of torment for his old enemy, a process known as the Rite of Nyos. It's a torture that's been described by many as being like the Chinese Ling Chi, also known as the lingering death, or slow slicing, but it is probably best known as the death by 1,000 cuts. The Soviets and the Sarkics parted ways. For the next few years, Stalin took a great deal of pleasure in visiting Hitler's cage now and then to torture him, until Stalin himself eventually passed away from natural causes. The GRUP division, which is essentially the Soviet answer to the SCP Foundation, decided it would be best to do away with the Immortal Hitler Clone after Stalin's death. He no longer served any purpose, and no matter how hard they tried, they couldn't permanently kill him either. In the end, they settled on a kind of compromise. He would be buried alive and forgotten, forced to live a torturous eternity that he could never escape. Until, of course, he was dug up and rescued by none other than the members of Obscura, a modern splinter group of the original Obscura Corps. Like many high-profile Nazis who'd escaped the war, the new Hitler was spirited away to a safe house run by sympathizers in Argentina. The ones taking care of him received the following correspondence from the Obscura agents who'd first dug the new Hitler back up. "We have managed to rescue the Führer and bring him to safety, but he is effectively dead on the inside. I blame the Reds for their inhumane treatment of the Führer, who may have been bewitched by the Reds' Wunderwaffe. I wish we could mercy kill him, but we've tried everything. He just won't perish. Don't abandon him. He's too distinct in plain sight." They didn't have the new Hitler for long, though. In 1960, efforts to hunt down the remaining Nazi fugitives increased in intensity. The new Hitler was soon captured by Mossad agents searching for Nazis in Buenos Aires, and then remanded to the containment of the SCP Foundation when they realized that he had a number of anomalous properties, such as his incredible regenerative abilities, as well as the fact that his DNA seems to be based on that of a wild boar and a goat rather than a human. However, X-rays conducted by the Foundation have discovered traces of cyanide still in his system, as well as traces of lead in his skull where the bone has regrown over the bullet. In other words, it was unquestionably the real Hitler, and he was now in Foundation custody forevermore. It's such a wild story even by Foundation standards that you can barely summon the words to respond once your supervisor is finished. He just stands there with a slight smile, basking in your amazement. Before you can even ask again, he confirms the facts one more time. Yes, it is the real Hitler. The only functional difference is that he can't die and he has a heightened sense of pain compared to most people. You think on what you've been told for just a moment, and then you have only one question. "Are we allowed to punch him?" Your supervisor smiles and says, "Of course, we all do." The helicopter hovered over the back streets of Manhattan. To the untrained eye, it would look like any commercial or news helicopter, the kind of thing that might catch your attention for a moment and then leave just as quickly as your mind wanders over to wondering what you'll have for dinner. Nobody would know from a mere glance that Mobile Task Force Iota 5 were inside, a four-man team on a dangerous mission. This has always been the greatest power of the SCP Foundation, hiding in plain sight, using the mundane as a cloak to go unnoticed. But this time, the monster they were hunting was capable of doing the exact same thing. And for the personnel of the Foundation, this ability is an affectation, a learned and adopted skill. For SCP-247, this ability, that it employs to deadly effect, comes as naturally as breathing air. The helicopter was monitoring local police scanners and phone activity, as well as receiving direct radio orders from command back at a classified containment site. The latest intel was incoherent, horrified screaming over the phone traced back to a nearby alleyway. Someone had seen something horrifying. This was Iota 5's cue to intervene. They rappelled down from the helicopter onto the roof of a nearby tenement building, clad in thick tactical armor, anti-memetic scramble goggles, Dan Inject IM injection rifles loaded with 10cc S10 syringe darts, each one carrying an immobilizing payload of potent fast-acting xylazine, and high-powered conventional weaponry in case of emergencies. If anyone in the world was capable of tracking, securing, and containing SCP-247, it was these four operatives. And yet, by the end of today's mission, one of them would be dead. But they didn't know that yet. Like all good MTF members, they had tunnel vision for the mission at hand. They used a fire escape ladder on the side of the building to reach the bottom of the alleyway quickly. There they came upon a gruesome sight, the aftermath of an attack. On the ground, a dead body with what looked like claw marks all over it. Iota 5 found another civilian, half mad with confusion and terror, hiding behind a nearby dumpster. She just kept shaking and repeating, "But she was so little," over and over again. One member of the task force, Corporal Rico, elected to stay behind and secure the area, while Foundation cleanup teams zeroed in to sweep the scene and provide amnestics to witnesses. The remaining 3 continued the high-stakes chase on foot. Their eyes in the sky radioed in. "Stay frosty, Iota. We've got unusual incident reports from an apartment building a quarter click north of your position. Potential fatalities. 247 is in an extremely hostile state. Engage with caution. Over." The trio engaged quickly, running towards the source of the disturbance at breakneck speeds. They knew they were getting closer when they heard the shrieking and the deep, guttural growls. That low, primal rumbling of a true apex predator. Already, this containment breach was turning out to be a horrific mess. It was going to be a nightmare for the higher-ups at the cleanup and misinformation departments to handle. Paying to repair inexplicable property damage, providing amnestics to tens if not hundreds of traumatized witnesses, creating plausible cover stories for upwards of at least 10 dead New Yorkers. But even all that mess would have to wait until the creature was actually captured and contained once more, which would be an ordeal unto itself. They found SCP-247's access point into the building, a wooden door torn to splinters by huge claws and fangs. Iota-5 charged inside, injection rifles at the ready only to find carnage in the hallway. 3 more bodies with deep claw marks cutting into their flesh. It was a harrowing sight, but the team didn't have time to waste processing it. They needed to stop 247 before it killed again and again and again. The team followed the trail of blood and the claw marks carved into the ground where 247 had passed. After killing the 3 people in the hallway, it destroyed another door and gained access to a nearby stairwell. The blood continued up the steps. Iota-5 pursued. The next splintered door, clawed and bashed off its hinges, led them further. They could hear the growling again, distant but clearly audible. They were close. There were another 2 attacked corpses in the hallway. Previous corpses had been partially or even entirely eaten. These 2 had just been clawed to death. Defensive kills. They'd backed the beast into a corner, and now it was panicking, slaughtering anything it perceived as an interference. They pressed on now. This was the endgame. Soon they found the final busted door. This one led into one of the building's private apartments. There'd be no other way out from here. 247 was trapped. The 3 members of Iota-5 shouldered their injection rifles and crept inside, full stealth mode. Something about the apartment was haunting. It portrayed all the signs of belonging to a young single mother and her only son. This was confirmed when they found the dead body of the mother in the living room, eyes glassy and throat clawed out with one feral strike. They could hear something else in the apartment too, a soft, gentle cooing, too human to be anything else. They followed the noise until they reached the child's bedroom. What they saw there caused even the most hardened member of the trio to break out in a cold sweat. This was the one thing they didn't want to happen. The child, utterly oblivious to the atrocities that had unfolded in his building, to even the death of his own mother, was sitting in his bedroom petting a kitten. It was the sweetest little cat you've ever seen. A fluffy, harmless creature with an orange striped coat. This is the dreaded SCP-247. The child just kept repeating, "Good kitty, while petting her. SCP-247 purred and rolled around playfully. To the untrained eye, it would seem that a kitty like this couldn't hurt a fly, but that's where you couldn't be more wrong. Iota-5 stared at this display in a state of nerve-shredding terror, thinking fast, trying to calculate their next move. "Aw, what an adorable little cat," one of the Iota-5 members found themselves blurting out. It was clear that 247's effects were starting to have an impact on even these hardened soldiers, and they needed to act quickly. They could fire a tranquilizer dart right here or right now, but in the ensuing panic, SCP-247 would almost definitely lash out and maul the child. It wasn't a risk that they could take, but time was already running out. 247 would only allow the child to play for so long before something terrible happened. It was an inevitable part of SCP-247's process. That's when Private Kowalski, one of the remaining members of Iota-5, stepped forward. He was about to do the only thing he could do, knowing that it would cost him his life. As he took his final action, the Foundation credo looped once more through his head. We die in the dark so that others can live in the light. Fighting against the urge to rush forward and start petting the cat, he instead lunged forward and struck the cat with his foot. Immediately it turned and pounced, knocking Kowalski against the wall with terrifying force. It gave the most ferocious growls as it tore into the screaming Kowalski, eviscerating his abdomen. The child screamed and retreated into the opposite corner of the room. Kowalski was done for, but now his teammates had a clear shot. They secured 247 in their sights and unloaded several darts into its flank, sedating it with their powerful tranquilizers. Soon after, it gave a lethargic growl and collapsed onto the ground. An evac and containment team were already on the way, along with the cleaners. Many had died that day, but at least SCP-247 would be brought back into containment, preventing further bloodshed. Kowalski would be given a posthumous Medal of Bravery for his selfless actions in the line of duty, as well as a generous stipend to his grieving family. By this point, you're probably wondering, how can a harmless kitten cause so much carnage, mayhem, and despair? The answer is simple. It's not a kitten at all. It's a fully grown female Bengal tiger, 9 feet and 400 pounds of pure muscle, with 4-inch claws, 4-inch canines, and an inbuilt killer instinct. But due to an anomalous mimetic effect, 247 can only ever be perceived as a sweet, tiny house cat. But even worse, due to its additional cognitohazardous properties, almost everyone who sees 247 is compelled to approach and begin dotting and fawning over it. And that's exactly how it gets its prey. Its mimetic properties are actually so flawless that, regardless of Foundation countermeasures, it has never been perceived as anything other than a kitten. It's actually only through forensic analysis into things like bite and claw marks left on victims, measurements of weight, and abnormal water displacement in aqueous environments that we can tell it's really a tiger at all. For a brief period, SCP-148, a metal that seems to counteract cognitohazards and mind-warping anomalies, was used in the containment of this Euclid Class creature, but these measures were abandoned after SCP-148 proved to have a negative impact on nearby Foundation staff after prolonged exposure. Now strict protocols of surveillance and distancing are required to prevent hapless Foundation staff members from being lured into their doom by 247. The head researcher on the SCP-247 case wanted to conduct a series of experiments on SCP-247, hoping to find out more about the interplay of its unique traits with other members of the animal kingdom. 2 control animals were brought in to represent the duality of SCP-247. Control A was a yellow kitten, roughly matching 247's apparent shape and size. Control B was a fully grown Bengal tiger, representing 247's actual shape and size. A mixed breed cat-chasing terrier was brought in for the first test. It immediately followed Control A around, barking wildly until it retreated up a tree. Unsurprisingly, it fled in terror from Control B, cowering in the corner. Control B paid no mind to the dog, perhaps considering it beneath its attention, even as prey. With SCP-247, the dog initially ran towards it, barking until it was only 5 meters away. At this point, 247 let out an irritated mewling noise, and the dog fled to the corner in terror, suddenly aware of its true nature. For test number 2, a male tabby kitten was brought in. As expected, it simply played with Control A and was terrified of Control B. In the first part of the test with 247, the anomalous attributes of the creature led to some surreal, mind-bending footage. At multiple points, 247 picked up the other kitten, as an adult female tiger might do with a cub, and lifted it higher than 247 seemed to be capable of. It was like watching a glitch in real time. In the second part of the test, the kitten immediately fled in terror, suggesting 247 can control how it's perceived. Next came a deer, prey typical of a Bengal tiger. Neither Control B nor 247 were fed for 3 days prior to this experiment, and both killed and ate the deer. However, curiously, 247 killed the deer with a single merciful bite to the neck before eating, compared to its more brutal methods with human targets. and when this experiment was repeated with 247 after it hadn't been starved, it showed little interest in the deer until it became hungry again, suggesting it inherently prefers human or human-like prey. This theory was further reinforced during tests with a chimpanzee. The chimp fell under 247's cognitohazardous spell and began to pet it. 7 minutes later, 247 attacked and brutally devoured the chimp, as it would its human prey. But strangely, the most frightening result of all came when SCP-247 was paired with an adult male Bengal tiger. They engaged in standard mating behavior, which later led to the duo reproducing a new creature, designated SCP-247-1, which had all the anomalous traits of SCP-247, but the frightening realizations don't stop there. Studies into genetic material provided by SCP-247 show slight deviation from a typical Bengal tiger's genotype, suggesting contamination from another creature that mated with one of its non-anomalous tiger parents. For context, tiger broods have an average of 3 cubs, but can have as many as 7, a common practice given how tiger cubs are vulnerable to cannibalism from rival adult males looking to court the females. This leads to only one frightening conclusion. There could be more creatures just like SCP-247 out there, apex predators that seem to the untrained eye like cute, harmless kittens. They could be anywhere. And if they're close enough to each other or other non-anomalous tigers, they could breed even further, becoming the scariest invasive urban species you've ever seen. Because after all, we know what their preferred prey is now. So the next time you see a cute little orange tabby cat and feel the instinct to pet it, take a second to think about it. It may be the last thing you ever do. The nightlife in Italy is famous worldwide. When the sun goes down, its cities come alive with locals and tourists alike, looking to party, have fun, and sometimes even get a little rowdy. But in an unknown town in Italy, there is a nightclub that offers a very different experience. For those who wander in, they might find themselves playing a role in a drama far more exciting and dangerous than the night out they expected. To the outside viewer, SCP-453 is nothing out of the ordinary. Just a standard nightclub filled with partygoers and revelers evening after evening. As typical as it may seem, the unassuming nature of the venue is nothing short of intentional by design. It is actually a front, owned and operated by Foundation personnel who carefully monitor everyone who comes in and out, keeping a watchful eye for any indication of drama or danger. Violence can and will erupt at any moment, and no matter what, no night at the club is ever routine. But the visitors' chaotic actions are not their own. Though the people's decision to attend the club is of their own free will, after some time settling into the environment, something changes. Over the course of the night, people begin to do things that may otherwise seem out of character for them. In fact, they are playing roles. Though the same roles are played each evening, they are played by different people night after night. Some of these dramas are harmless, but some are violent, and some may even be world-threatening. If the partygoers survive their role in their scripts, they will then leave the club and return home, with only a faint memory of the events they took part in that evening. The next night the process renews and the events will repeat. But not all scripts repeat at the same frequency. Some are regular, while others are only triggered by special circumstances. Only select people take part in these scripts, while the others around them go about their night until triggered to take on a role. And these bizarre performances may have been going on for a very long time. The building now known as SCP-453 may have existed in some form or another even before the Foundation existed, with investigations of the site indicating that it was once a villa of a powerful Roman senator who held extensive parties every night. These pervasive affairs, the odd happenings that occurred during them, may have left a lasting imprint, because no matter what is built on the site, it seems as though people are attracted to the building to party. The Foundation has had possession of the site for a long time, and in a previous attempt to neutralize its chaotic power, they even went as far as demolishing it completely to the ground, but that still proved ineffective, Even when there was no villa or nightclub present, large groups of revelers would still gather. The gatherings would turn into street parties, the street parties into riots. Many times these circumstances were cause for even worse consequences than the regular series of events. The Foundation didn't know how to stop the Scripted Nightclub, but they could maybe control it. If the people wanted a nightclub, the Foundation would give them one. The site was rebuilt from scratch, and from the outside looking in had all the characteristics of your standard everyday disco watering hole. But really, it was meticulously constructed to be a sophisticated SCP facility, capable of handling whatever anomalous activity was thrown at it. Built from the same materials used in all other SCP containment sites, and always staffed with containment personnel on high alert, ready to handle the more violent and dangerous scripts that may play out at any moment. But control over the Scripted Nightclub may be more easily said than done. The nightclub has been in operation for a long time, and over the years the staff has noticed some extremely odd events taking place. For instance, certain things aren't always where they're supposed to be. Aspects of the club are built and then slowly shifted to new locations within the site over time. Most notable, the weapons locker on site for staff to suppress violent incidents has slowly been drifting towards the men's restroom and away from the secured section for staff only. And it's not the only part of the building slowly shuffling its way about. Could SCP-453 be learning to foil the Foundation? And if so, why? While many of the scripts that play out in the nightclub are harmless, some are of more concern. The Foundation has been studying what triggers different scripts, and while some seem to inevitably play out and pull people in, others are triggered by the presence of different guests. The Silver Harlequins will only play out if more than 15 guests are over the age of 60, but there are a few distinct characteristics of the scripts. All begin at approximately 9 p.m. at night, and while people continue behaving in modern ways, there is one key difference. All scripted dialogue takes place entirely in Latin. The Foundation believes that these scripts may be playing out events that happened in the initial incarnations of the club back in Roman times. While the players differ, the events always remain the same, and while the scripts rotate, SCP-453 seems to gravitate towards 3 scripts, all posing unique challenges for the Foundation, and one posing a potential end-of-the-world scenario. First up, Script 43, the Cheating Wife. This is normally the most common script and poses a relatively small threat to those not actively engaged in the script or outside the nightclub. The main priority is to have the staff's medical team on site and ready to intervene when things get bloody. It begins at 9:49 p.m. when a young woman heads to the men's bathroom. She will be followed by 3 men. The events of the bathroom are expunged, but a little over an hour later, a 4th male will enter the picture. It's the husband of the woman, and he's not happy. He will enter the nightclub, order a bottle of red wine, and head to the bathroom. There, he will brutally assault the 3 men, knocking all 3 unconscious and causing minor brain trauma to the 3rd. He will then drag his wife out of the restroom, cursing her and accusing her of infidelity as he takes her out of the nightclub. The script then terminates, and all participants no longer remember the events beyond a bar fight. Medical attention is recommended for the 3 men and the woman, especially the most severely injured of the men. But after the script concludes, strange events continue to happen. While none of the participants know each other before the script begins and don't maintain memory of the exact events, they display strange behavior. The man playing the husband becomes violent when questioned and develops an obsession with the woman playing his wife. The Foundation believes it wise to keep these 2 individuals separated. Oddly, SCP-453 seems to prefer men who are shorter and less physically strong than the other men to play the husband. Attempts to short-circuit the script have proved unsuccessful, only delaying it. An attempt to remove the weapon, a wine bottle, has led to the husband using more dangerous weapons like a bar stool instead, which can lead to fatalities. It seems that SCP-453 gets what it wants, and what it wants is for the show to go on. Then there is Script 21, the Senator's Visit. This is considered a higher priority script, and the Foundation knows to be on high alert for medical intervention to prevent fatalities. This one kicks off at 10:13 p.m. as a civilian steps into the club and takes the role of the senator, the original owner of the villa. He's accompanied by an entourage of 13 servants, each carrying improvised weapons. And when they step in, the club stops dead in anticipation of the coming events, because two people in the club just became assassins. The senator and his servants take over a table, and the senator begins ordering extravagant food and drinks. He'll always gravitate towards the most expensive items available from the current stock, and his orders are always completed at specific times, no matter how the Foundation tries to intervene. During his meal, a civilian selected to be an activist will approach the senator and begin criticizing the treatment of the citizens in a nearby city, only to be assaulted brutally by 3 members of the entourage. The Foundation will take her away for medical treatment after she's left for dead. If you think that's brutal, be prepared, because the senator's night is about to get a whole lot more dangerous. The first of 2 assassins will then approach the senator, pull a blade, and attack him. The assassin will be intercepted by 4 servants who will kill him, despite the best efforts of Foundation personnel to prevent the outcome. But it's the second assassin who is of far greater concern. He will incite a brawl among civilians around the eastern wall of the club, then use the chaos to attack 7 of the servants as he approaches the senator. Those servants are of priority for medical intervention, but the chaos makes it impossible to intercept them until 10 minutes after midnight. The assassin will then engage with the remaining servants, barely surviving, and eventually stab the senator in the neck fatally. The Foundation has been unable to prevent this, and the danger isn't over yet. The fight at the nightclub will continue to escalate, causing more injuries but no more fatalities, until over an hour has passed and 19 civilians take on the role of Roman guards. They'll pacify the crowd and clear the club. This is when the Foundation can finally intervene and treat the wounded. Much like the first smaller-scale script, any attempts to interrupt the flow of the events taking place will be unsuccessful, and often result in more deaths. None of the large number of participants remember the events, only believing they were in a brutal bar fight. This is one of the most common scripts, and the Foundation's only priority is to try to minimize casualties with quick medical intervention. But one script hints at a much darker event at the club, and that's Script 82, the Plurality Cult. Most scripts begin before midnight and plunge the club into chaos, but if no script has started before then and the club seems mundane, the Foundation knows to get ready. They'll suit up in riot gear designed to withstand neurotoxins and claim to the guests that this is part of a theme night. At roughly 2 hours after midnight, the events will begin with one civilian standing in the center of the room saying, "The time of plurality has come." At least half of the other civilians will then join in saying, "We embrace the many." But there is something different about this script. Sometimes Foundation staff members will join in. This is the most dangerous script at SCP-453, and staff knows to immediately terminate any Foundation member who has been converted, because Intervention 453-82 Pariah is about to begin, and there is no room for error. First, any civilians who did not become engaged in the cult should be immediately evacuated to a safe holding area if possible. The priority then turns to subduing the cultists by any means necessary. The security team should attempt to restrain them and keep them alive, but lethal force may be necessary. The cultists have a priority of their own though. They will not respond to any attacks by the security team, and will instead begin a Latin chant that ends with their leader laughing hysterically and offering a toast to the club. The club will seemingly return to normal, but the danger is just beginning. Before 2:25 a.m., all the cultists and all civilians must be removed from the premises, by any means necessary. If other attempts have failed, the Foundation will release Type 14 neurotoxic gas into the club to eliminate anyone on site, with one exception. The cult leader is not to be harmed under any circumstances. If the cult leader is harmed in any way or the staff has not subdued the cult by 2:30 a.m., the Foundation will trigger a self-destruct mechanism that will eliminate the threat, for now. The site's unique properties cannot be stopped, but the script can be stopped in its tracks. The clock cannot be allowed to reach 3 a.m. under any circumstances. More worrisome, this script is becoming more and more frequent. The cycle continues, but the Foundation is focused on containment. The club is to be staffed at all times by bartenders, bouncers, cleaners, and emergency and medical staff, as well as at least 10 security staff members and 2 observation personnel. All are responsible for studying and memorizing the scripts, and being prepared to handle any scripted events that occur. The site is to be inspected and measured regularly for any changes, and to make sure all its security measures are in working order. The site will be locked every day between 4 a.m. and 8 p.m. to prepare for the night ahead, because at 8 p.m. on the dot, SCP-453 opens for business, seeking new players for its drama of the night. Who doesn't love their pets, right? Whether it's a dog, a cat, a goldfish, or a hamster, any pet owner will tell you that their furry friend is so much more than just an animal that they adopted. To many, pets become permanent additions to the family. While they might not look like a human being or even have the ability to speak the way we do, a lot of owners view their pets as people in their own right. Of course, a person can't be a pet. At least a human person can't, right? Well, not unless you happen to be a part of SCP-1897, otherwise known as the Human Domestication Society. If you've ever been brave enough to travel alone to the rural parts of southwestern states like Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, Oklahoma, Utah, or Nevada, then it's likely you would have been an ideal victim for SCP-1897. This designation doesn't refer to one single creature or entity, but rather a group of similar beings. Witness testimonies and photographs of SCP-1897 depict them as humanoid creatures, standing approximately 5 meters in height. These beings have displayed a speed and strength far beyond that of any human. They are capable of traveling roughly 200 meters in only 9 seconds, and lifting weights of up to 500 kilos with a single hand. These entities are not immortal and can be harmed by conventional means, but that doesn't mean it's an easy task. Any SCP-1897 instance that is killed or incapacitated immediately vanishes, resulting in them dropping anything that they may have been carrying at the time. And surprisingly, these are not mindless monsters, and actually appear to be capable of communication. Furthermore, they do not seem to speak a unique or distinct language, but instead communicate in standard American English, with accents and vernacular appropriate to the regions they appear in. However, they will actively refuse to reply to any human that attempts to engage them in conversation. Now, these creatures don't spend every waking hour of the day roaming around the states of Texas, Oklahoma, and all the others we listed. If they did, it's likely a lot more civilians would have spotted them by now, and would probably live their lives in fear of these gigantic 5-meter-tall humanoids. But instances of SCP-1897 will only manifest if certain specific criteria are met, and these are as follows. To encounter SCP-1897, a person must be alone or part of a group of no more than 2. If more than one person is with them, then no manifestation will occur. There is one exception to the rule: if a child under the age of 12 is present. Secondly, neither the person nor anyone with them can be carrying any kind of weapon. That means no knives, no guns, not even pepper spray. Third and finally, they must be at least 25 meters from a major population center. And what happens when all of these conditions are met and one of these creatures appears? Anyone witnessing their arrival will notice the creatures materializing, appearing to emerge from some form of unseen vehicle. When they manifest, the SCP-1897 entities are almost always carrying long poles with large nets at the end, as well as steel cages, and are often seen wearing dark green uniforms. In most cases, they will attempt to capture any nearby person in a way that causes them the least possible harm. Should an SCP-1897 creature successfully apprehend a person and place them in a cage, both them and their captive will vanish in a similar manner to the way the creature appeared. All attempts to track SCP-1897 or one of its abducted victims have failed. There is no way to know where they are taken, but as far as what happens to them, that we do have a little more insight to. Sometimes, although it is a highly rare occurrence, the captured human victims may reappear around a month after their capture, while never in the same location as where they disappeared from. They will always be accompanied by an SCP-1897 instance and will stay close by the creature's side. At this point, the abductee is barely human anymore. They are considered an instance of what is known as SCP-1897-1. What signifies this sudden and drastic transformation? For one, these victims are always found to have been forcibly castrated or sterilized, essentially no longer able to reproduce the way humans naturally do. For another, these instances of SCP-1897-1 universally display a decreased level of cognitive and mental function. What we mean is that their brains do not function the way they should anymore. Instead, these abductees exhibit the same level of intelligence and capability as the average Canis lupus familiaris, otherwise known as the common domestic dog. Should someone attempt to rescue a person that has become an instance of SCP-1897-1, or display hostility towards the SCP-1897 creature that accompanies them, they will be met with outward animalistic aggression from the victim. It has been discovered by the SCP Foundation that these behaviors can be treated with amnestics. Unfortunately, though, the process of an abducted person becoming an SCP-1897-1 instance seems to be the result of an invasive medical procedure known as a lobotomy. This typically involves removing or disabling certain parts of the human brain, meaning that what has been done to these victims is permanent and cannot be reversed. So who is doing all of this? Why are these creatures collecting innocent human beings only to reduce them to little more than animals? The answers lie in something currently referred to as SCP-1897-2. Not another creature or entity, not an anomalous artifact or location with strange properties, but a website found at the address www.hdsociety.gov. According to the information on this site, it belongs to a group calling themselves the Human Domestication Society. The website features pages such as adoption, training, breeding programs, volunteering, and more. The fact that this is the kind of website you might expect to be about dogs or cats but instead focuses on the domestication of humans is certainly enough to turn the stomach. As we said at the start of the video, surely a human being can't be somebody's pet, right? Wrong. At least as far as the Human Domestication Society goes. Their website contains everything and anything one of these SCP-1897 creatures could ever hope to learn about owning a human as a pet. Has your human been misbehaving? Need to train them to use the toilet? These pages have all the information you need to help your human become the most well-trained human on your block. Boast the training page of www.hdsociety.gov. The remainder of the page contains links to various articles such as obedience training, which claims an owner of a human can show them who's boss without the need for physical violence. Also featured are mentions of how to toilet train or play fetch with a human, how to introduce a human to others due to them naturally not getting along. Perhaps most chilling of all is one article titled Understanding What Your Human Wants, that warns human beings shouldn't talk. And another, Dealing with Strays, offers tips for anyone wanting to learn to capture their own pets themselves. It doesn't seem like too much of a leap to think that the SCP-1897 creatures have followed a lot of the advice from this particular article. Arguably worst of all is an image featured on the website of a tall, menacing SCP-1897 entity brandishing a Picana Electrica. This device, for any unfamiliar with the term, is a form of high-voltage electrical cattle prod, normally used for the purposes of torture. In the photograph in question, the creature is wielding one of these while standing sternly over a helpless captive human male, now an instance of SCP-1897-1 with tears in his eyes. Further pages found on www.hdsociety.gov recommend solutions to certain human behaviors. For example, like one might expect to find on other pet care websites. Some of the Human Domestication Society's articles pertain to dealing with aggression, grooming, house training, and even toilet training. Then there's the adoption page, which states, "We offer a large variety of humans for adoption every single day. While we cannot guarantee a human you see listed on our website will be available when you reach the shelter, Our inventory is updated every half hour. We cannot answer any questions about specific humans pictured on our website over the phone or email. It is still unclear whether or not the SCP-1897 creatures that have been known to appear in the southwestern United States are sent out to gather humans en masse to offer for adoption, or whether these creatures are individuals trying to obtain human pets on their own. Of course, the worst conceivable answer is both. The site is horrifyingly comprehensive, with links to an actual human ownership convention, with panels on breeding and preventing illegal human poaching and skinning. It's safe to say if that you were ever unlucky enough to read this website, it would haunt you for life. Naturally, the SCP Foundation has made several attempts to contact the owners of this website. They tried in vain to communicate through the official channels about SCP-1897-1 adoption, as a way of peacefully negotiating that the Human Domestication Society website be shut down, as well as its practices of capturing, lobotomizing, breeding, and adopting humans. However, these communication attempts were met with silence. That is, until a message was received by the Foundation at Site-06, addressed to a member of personnel that does not exist. No data pertaining to the physical location of the sender could be derived from the email, but it was traced to the same IP address as the Human Domestication Society's website. The email read as follows: "We will not listen to your lies any longer. It was you who came after us first. You who tore holes in our world and tried to annihilate us. You who took our olive branch of peace and fashioned it into a spear. You who nearly drove us to extinction. And now that we have the advantage, you attempt to patronize us with your crocodile tears. We will not be deceived again. But unlike you, we are not monsters. We have much anger towards your kind, but we are willing to forgive. But first you must be willing to change. Slavery and genocide are immoral, and not even you deserve such a fate. It is our belief then that this alternative is a fair compromise between guaranteeing our safety and allowing your kind to live. This is our mercy to you. Look at the humans who have gone through our program. See how much happier they are? Your correspondence tells us that you have seen them. See how much they love us. Why then do you continue to be defiant? Someday you will thank us. Please try to understand that this is for your own good. For now, there is little that the SCP Foundation can do to prevent the Human Domestication Society from abducting human beings to sell as pets to other SCP-1897 creatures. Civilian access to the hdsociety.gov website has been restricted, so we recommend you stop typing into the search bar of your browser to go take a peek. Yes, we mean you. Seriously, stop that. As for the entities that have appeared in the rural areas of the southwestern states, all the Foundation can do is position its agents nearby, in the hopes that they can detain and neutralize the SCP-1897s as they appear, with lethal force if necessary. At present, the only procedure for any human pets that are successfully recaptured is to have them moved safely to containment until a way of rehabilitating them is found. So far, there hasn't been any luck on that front. Working at the SCP Foundation can really get your appetite going. After spending a rough shift monitoring the acid levels in SCP-682's tank, or performing the rituals necessary to keep the Devourer of Worlds on the other side of SCP-2317, sometimes you just need a quick snack to hold you over before you return to the old grind. Problem is, at the SCP Foundation, even the break room can be perilous. Dr. Dan is notorious for pilfering pudding cups from the communal fridge, and ever since the administrator himself stole your tuna sandwich, you just don't feel safe spending your lunch break on site anymore. But this presents its own series of issues. You only have an hour for lunch, and obviously you can't order in due to security issues. Also, if you're eating off-site, you have even less time to finish your lunch because the site you're currently stationed at is relatively remote. We're talking at least a half-hour round trip to actually get to somewhere, so you're gonna need your food fast. And when it comes to fast food, few eateries are as prolific as the Golden Arches, McDonald's. And just to clarify, this video is not sponsored. We're gonna tell you about a horrifying anomalous secret that this company really doesn't want you to know about. Let's not think about that just yet though. Your stomach is rumbling, and you need that quarter pounder so bad that even being trapped in the red reality with Dr. Scranton couldn't stop you from getting it. When you finally arrive, you buy your typical order. A quarter pounder with french fries, a coffee, and a McFlurry. You see Dr. Clef a few tables down enjoying a box of chicken nuggets and ketchup, but decide not to engage. As you sit and enjoy your meager little lunch, knowing you'll probably be coordinating the cleaning efforts of SCP-173's containment chamber by the end of the day, your eyes drift over to something even more unsettling. Happy, the current mascot for McDonald's Happy Meals. You can't help but shudder. You've seen some pretty horrific things on the job. Nightmarish things. You fear no monster, but that thing, it scares you. Those big, soulless eyes, the wide, gaping maw full of 2 white teeth. Its diabolical sneakers. No child should ever have to look at that. You can't help but wonder, whatever happened to Ronald McDonald, the hamburger-happy clown that shilled fast food to you throughout your childhood? What is he up to now? Well, we have an answer for you, but I'll warn you, you may not be quite as eager to suck down a Big Mac and a Diet Coke after hearing this. Ronald McDonald, first introduced as the company's mascot in 1963, had a pretty good run, before finally being largely phased out by the company in the mid-2010s for a greater focus on the nasty little box homunculus. You can thank John Wayne Gacy, Pennywise, and those goofballs dressed up as clowns back in 2016 for that. But like anyone who loses favor stateside, Ronald had a prosperous career ahead of him outside the country. Well, not the Ronald we know, at least. You see, in an undisclosed cattle farm in 2004, most likely in North America, a monster was born. A horrific abomination birthed from a cow, like many have theorized about SCP-058, the Heart of Darkness. But this nasty little creature wasn't a giant heart with a stinger and scorpion legs. In many ways, it appeared superficially humanoid, save for its stark white skin, its thick red lips, and its full head of bright, frizzy red hair. But that was only the start of the unnerving strangeness exhibited by this miracle child. It was born with white gloves and long, clownish shoes seemingly grafted to its feet. Fresh from birth, the creature was huge, with a disproportionately large head and wide, disgusting pores that seemed to perpetually leak fry oil. The creature was unresponsive to any kind of external stimuli, perhaps suggesting it was brain dead, and it remained completely dormant most of the time. While most people would have screamed, run away, or called the police, the farmers at this particular cattle farm decided to let it ride and see how this whole nightmarish affair played out. That sense of curiosity and patience would soon pay off for them financially. It didn't take long for the creature to grow. The bigger it got, the more it looked like a giant mutant version of McDonald's iconic mascot, Ronald McDonald. And this wasn't just a coincidence either. It turned out that this monster was somehow intrinsically linked to the McDonald's brand, because once a day the creature would horrifically unhinge its jaw and begin to barf out a huge quantity of McDonald's food. And we're not talking about raw materials that are converted into McDonald's food. The creature, later dubbed SCP-5962, vomited out fully packaged McDonald's products. The owners of this clownish monster had just hit the lottery, so to speak. While the particulars of the deal are unclear, they somehow contacted a representative of the McDonald's Corporation based in China. In exchange for presumably a large sum of money, Chinese McDonald's operatives covertly entered the country and shepherded the now massive creature over to a McDonald's-owned warehouse in Beijing. By this point, it was around 4 meters tall and weighed over 5 tons. It was kept inside a cage and housed at some cost, but soon enough, the creature was paying for itself. As we mentioned before, the creature constantly secreted fry oil, which was siphoned off for use in preparing McDonald's food across the country. The huge quantity of packaged food that it vomited out every day was also shipped off to restaurants across the country, making the Chinese branch of McDonald's incredibly financially successful. They were able to make an almost complete profit on all of these foods and drinks, once transport costs were subtracted, of course. SCP-5962 had become McDonald's China's best-kept secret. But of course, no secret this sensational could stay under wraps forever, no matter how much people in the warehouse were paid or threatened for their silence. If your day job was siphoning grease off of a giant mutant clown for the purpose of preparing McDonald's food across the country, there'd be no way you wouldn't speak to somebody about it. Nobody knows whose loose lips sunk this incredibly profitable ship, but rumors began to spread around Beijing about a huge clown inside of a McDonald's packaging facility. That was when local field agents of the SCP Foundation finally took notice. 2 agents,
Jonathan Zhang and George Nagasaw, were dispatched to perform an infiltration mission along with a team of backup personnel. They entered the warehouse, apprehending any employees they found. As they and their reinforcements reached the northern side of the facility, they found SCP-5962 with a heavy collar around its neck, chained to the ground like King Kong, as McDonald's employees wheeled away carts of packaged food. Neither of the attending agents were fans of McDonald's food, but even then, just seeing this horrible display was enough to make them feel nauseous. The creature was taken and contained by the SCP Foundation, who conducted a number of tests on it. They found that the monster had no real internal organs save for 27 interconnected stomachs. Genetically, they also found that the creature was far more cow than human. The same could sadly not be said for the food that SCP-5962 was vomiting out. Seriously, if you are already feeling a little queasy from all this, we need to warn you that this is the part where things get really vile. Let's talk about what the McDonald's food barfed up by SCP-5962 was actually made out of. As we mentioned earlier, the food exuded by the creature was genetically human, with DNA often matching that of people who are alive and in no way affected by this anomalous process. Tests have indicated that certain foods, condiments, and beverages correspond to more specific types of bodily tissue and liquid. For example, the bacon and fries were shown to be cartilage and ligaments. The bread turned out to be made from hair, nails, and skin. The coffee was liquefied fecal matter. The chicken nuggets were made from fingers, ovaries, and testes. Even the water was a mix of saline and sweat. And of course, the ice cream was comprised of pus, bone marrow, feces, and nasal mucus, depending on the flavor. You get the idea. We'll stop listing off examples before you lose your lunch, but rest assured, all of the food produced by SCP-5962 was made of human organic matter. When the SCP Foundation interviewed Mr. Chen, the manager of the facility where SCP-5962 was being held, before his amnestic treatment, he seemed incredibly casual about the whole thing. As far as he was concerned, the food still tasted exactly the same as regular McDonald's food, and it didn't appear to have any adverse health effects beyond what you could expect from regular non-anomalous fast food. It's actually less cruel and disturbing than the slaughterhouses where the meat is typically obtained. Mr. Chen also contested that SCP-5962 wasn't all that dangerous either. The only time it ever performed an offensive action was when an employee of the enemy fast food franchise, Burger King, entered its vicinity. The creature vomited a stream of hot coffee at the corporate interloper like a fire hose until he left, suggesting that it does have some kind of strange inherent loyalty to the McDonald's company. But still, other than this isolated incident, the creature has never even displayed sentience. It was a big, strange, clownish McDonald's food dispenser. When questioned about the origins of SCP-5962, Mr. Chen once again underplayed the strangeness of the situation, saying that he'd heard rumors the farm that sold him SCP-5962 had also sold other strange, anomalous creatures to eager buyers in the US. The farm, which we can only assume is situated right next to a radioactive waste dump, was also behind SCP-4158, also known as Big Charlie. This giant omnivorous and seemingly immortal mutant cow is believed to have been birthed from a non-anomalous cow sold to the Butcher's Block slaughterhouse. It looked hideous and seemed to suffer from a wide variety of health issues, leading to the employees at the slaughterhouse trying to put the creature out of its misery. However, no matter how hard they tried to kill the monster, it just wouldn't die. Its bones were pretty much indestructible, and no matter how much of its flesh was cut off, it just kept growing back, causing no ill effects to the creature itself. Eventually, the slaughterhouse workers tried cooking and eating the meat, leading to them discovering it tasted just as good as non-anomalous meat. Much like the Chinese McDonald's and SCP-5962, the workers had just hit the lottery with Big Charlie. As long as they kept feeding the monster, which ate everything from bricks to other non-anomalous cows, it provided a pretty much limitless supply of meat, giving them unprecedented economic prosperity. In other words, Big Charlie was a literal cash cow. Jeff Fine, the slaughterhouse director, even started worshipping Big Charlie as a kind of demigod by drinking his blood. He believed that Big Charlie was a savior, sent to lift them all out of their struggle and desperation. Sadly for them, the SCP Foundation sent them right back when Big Charlie escaped their slaughterhouse, and Foundation field agents found, secured, and contained it. It was a sad day for the Butcher's Block. So, what have we learned today? Whether you're in the US of A or the Chinese heartland, if you're chowing down on fast food, you really have no idea where it came from. I mean, we kind of knew that already, but for all we know, the food you're enjoying could have just been vomited up by a giant fat clown, or cut from the flesh of a mutated cow. Just think about that next time you're enjoying a burger. But hey, let's be honest with ourselves. We'll all probably still eat it.
Whether these are 5-star luxury suites or seedy roach motels, there's something undeniably a little eerie about hotels. They're liminal spaces, transitional spots between origins and destinations. We've seen countless creepy hotel rooms in the horror genre, from Room 237 in The Shining's Overlook Hotel to the infamous Room 1408. But have you ever heard of Room 710, also known by a different number, SCP-2432? This hotel room is one of the most terrifying out there, but the funny thing is, you won't ever hear a bad word said about it. Room 710 has glowing, if a little strangely worded, reviews across the board, and when you see how people rave about it online, you'll find yourself unable to resist paying it a visit. But don't be nervous, all these people can't be wrong, right? And after all, it's just a room. What kind of harm could a room really do? Let's ask Chuck Peel, one of the many victims of SCP-2432. He was a traveling businessman, caught in the rat race of relentless sales pitches and conferences that felt like they were slowly but surely sucking out his soul. His next conference was in State College, Pennsylvania, and he'd spend the evening researching different places he could potentially stay during the trip. Chuck had been disenchanted with chain hotels over the years. Seeing the exact same setups again and again all across the country only worsened the feeling that his life was going nowhere. That's why whenever he was traveling out of town, he always tried to find an interesting, independent place to hang his hat. That's what led him to the Redacted Hotel. The pictures seemed nice, sure, but what really caught his eye were the positively fantastic reviews. Little note, certain details have been redacted to avoid subjecting you, the viewer, to the mimetic effects nested in these reviews. After all, we wouldn't want you to develop a sudden hankering for Room 710 and start buying your tickets to State College, Pennsylvania. The first review, found on TripAdvisor, said, "Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. The room was perfect, the staff friendly as always, and of course no better location than on this plane of many hives. I've enjoyed a drink at the friendly bar. This time I added a wonderful escape, and breakfast was cold and breakfast was warm. The restaurant has lovely ambience, and the food was over the top alive and kicking. Woo! Would stifle again. My husband eats out often and felt that this was one of the best one ever. Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. One more great item to add to the Redacted. Another great stay in this fabulous hotel. Stayed July 1999, traveled with 3 family members." The second review, this time posted on Yelp, read, "We sailed on our boat into State College from outside State College through the night and the cold and arrived at 8 a.m. in State College. The hotel desk staff allowed us to check in and out 8 a.m. in the evening with our 64 young boys. This was absolutely awesome customer service. We can't thank you enough for allowing us to check in oh so early in State College. Earlier than war. The rest of the stay was fine. We spent almost all of our time in the room, mostly just to sleep. This location is ultra convenient with downtown State College and allowed me to make a midnight run for some of my favorite State College meat while the family was sleeping in State College downtown. Redacted downtown." And the final review, which Chuck Peel found particularly compelling, read, "Been coming to this region for 14 stone. What a blast. Scores of humans wandering the streets and staffing the hotel. My husband and I have walked drooling path to get here. Bed in room 710 was soft and cozy and appreciated the decor, would recommend the bed, and specifically the bed. Redacted. In the pool, and it was lovely crisp blue hydrogen and you could see all the people relax into a meandering menace. Towel slightly dirty. Gym was full of usable equipment, so you could train not in fear. And the local wildlife was remarkable. I visited the town in the past and have not seen many puma being feasted on. Redacted. And the toucan man were especially numerous today. Arrived July 2019, staying 3 days, months, 10 years. Well, these may seem like utter nonsense to you. To someone reading them without the key mimetic trigger phrases redacted, they create an irresistible urge to visit the hotel and stay in room 710. It was an urge so primal and powerful that he couldn't wait to get going, if only because he could finally stay in this wonderful hotel and see what all this fuss was about. He booked his tickets, and a few days later, he was at the check-in desk. Something you need to understand is that Room 710 is extremely subtle in its anomalous methods. Unlike Room 237 or Room 1408, it won't attack the victims with ghosts or mind-warping hallucinations, nor will it drive them into acts of horrific violence against the ones they love or acts of self-destruction. One of the frightening things about Room 710 is that, while you're actually inside it, you can have an extremely pleasant stay. It's only once you leave that things start becoming truly terrifying, but we'll get to that when we get to it. Chuck made his way up to the room to take a shower and take the weight off his feet, and sure enough, the room seemed positively luxurious. 2 queen-size beds with fine linen, a spacious closet, a large flat-screen television, and a well-appointed bathroom with a combo shower bath. This was heaven. Sure, it was one more bed than he needed, but this meant he had a choice of which one he could sleep on. Fantastic. This is the insidious power of SCP-2432. There's nothing overt about the harm it causes at first. Chuck was more worried about the impending conference than he was about the fact he was in the belly of the anomalous beast. However, the SCP Foundation, through later analysis of the room, found that the anomalous elements aren't entirely ephemeral. There are certain details about the physical makeup of the room that causes and amplifies its effects. The walls are reinforced with hyper-strong aramid fibers, and it's believed that the very makeup of the room serves to create mind-warping oscillations that are undetectable to the conscious mind, but are particularly potent when the victim is asleep. Chuck didn't know it, but every moment he spent in that room, it was crawling into his head just that little bit more. He was already subconsciously composing his nonsensical, mimetic review of the place. As the night drew to a close, Chuck decided to relax and enjoy some television. The hotel's website boasted a wide variety of channels after all. But after switching through a few different channels, he came to rest at a channel simply called Room News. It was simple, but soothing. An image of a sailboat in the middle of a pastoral lake, while what sounded like cheerful elevator music played. Chuck simply sat and enjoyed the relaxing ambiance for a moment before the music was interrupted by a deep British voice who began delivering a strange monologue. For reasons he couldn't quite explain, Chuck felt that this voice was speaking directly to him. "Let me describe something to you. This is a true story. It really happened to me. It could have happened to you. Every day you wake up and you go to your job, and there's just something off about your boss. He's weird and clingy and strange. Your workers are nice enough, but they don't communicate. They are quiet and out of it and absorbed in their own little worlds, and you are ignored. Not because you are ugly or awkward or rude, but because you are there. And you suspect things about your coworkers. Despite their habits and strange things each of them places on their Twitter pages, they seem to be doing so much better than you. How are you falling behind? And you should love the job. It is your passion. Most would die to be doing a job they are passionate about. You really should, but you can't. Wonder becomes routine, and routine becomes drudgery, and it's day in and day out, and you struggle to maintain your soul. This is not what should happen. Should is such a tormenting word, a thinking trap. Should. Your life is ruled by shoulds. You come home in your beat-up old car along the same boring street in your town. Everything is along that main drag, and you cannot really go elsewhere. Everything is overcast, and the pedestrians are idiots, and the drivers are too. You get home and have a million billion projects to accomplish. You should compete in the rat race, but you're bone tired. You promise your grandmother you should text her because she's going through chemo, and she only just figured out texting because she's getting old and having a hard time adjusting, and it's oh so painful for her, and you should be there, but the job is so demanding. You have 1,000 books you should be reading. You have 1,000,000 projects you should complete. The rent on your tiny apartment is due and the dishes are piling high and dirty in the sink. You barely have enough money for pizza as you lie in your boxers on your greasy 10-year-old couch from an IKEA in Fishkill, New York that closed a year ago. You remember your mom taking you there as a kid. Then she left. You feel a deep, growing anxiety. The feeling of watching your life burn around you as you try and succeed for something great, to make your mark on society, but you cannot bring yourself to do so despite your convictions. The dread is horrible. It's all crumbling apart. The parade is passing you by and you are helpless, immobile in your state like a great boulder made of disappointment, regret, depression, and malaise. There is nothing for you here. You need to leave this place. You have a choice. Get your good clean shirt and your smart pants and announce you are taking a break. Don't even pack. Don't even bring your phone. One simple call to the office and get on your way. Take that beat-up old car from the garage underneath your apartment complex. Give your cat the last of his food and some water and hit the road. Leave the town and your ex and the promises you made and your job and your grandmother and your responsibilities and worries. What I recommend you do is simple. Find a hotel, not a motel or something shabby, a hotel. Even a chain will do. Hotels are simply remarkable, aren't they? Clean and elegant, all modernistic and designed to appeal in the eye. You don't even need to care about a thing in the world. Food is provided. They clean up after you and you can feel like you have some luxury for once. Most even have pools and fitness centers where you can finally get in shape and pick your life up. It's a chance to step back and regroup. Take a look at the customers around you. Travelers, most. Strange people. Interesting people. People you won't ever see again. Travel is so romantic, so mysterious. My, what stories these people probably have. And the staff also all are so attentive in their smart little uniforms. Don't listen to the naysayers. These people all love their jobs. You know they do. The room is amazing. The wallpaper is elegant, and the paintings make you feel at ease. There are clean towels every day, and the bed is freshly made. You can escape the oncoming storm outside, the thunder crashing down on the roof like ball bearings. You could live your whole life in this place. Enjoy the sugary cereals at the breakfast buffet. Get a loyalty card and pay no money. Traveling really changes a man, relaxes him, shapes him up into a better person. You become a better person by staying in a hotel. Strong, social, a proper soldier. You adapt to the hotel mindset. Enjoy the soft music and eat that fresh waffle. Grab a beer in the evening with your fellow transients from the attached sports bar. Relax and watch that old showing of that superhero movie on your TV. Live here forever. Enjoy the hotel. Become the hotel. Never leave. Why would you want to leave? Even when you do walk out of these pristine glass sliding doors, you are empty. The hotel is in your soul now, and you feel a worse person away from it. You feel yourself slipping back into that gray life. A black hole is in your heart. Your soul is the hotel. Your consciousness is the hotel. You are now one with your accommodations. Your accommodations are your life. Ascend. Isn't that lovely? As he fell asleep, Chuck found himself nodding. Yes, that is lovely. How nice it would be to ascend. Little did he know he was receiving a broadcast from SCP-2432-1, a small boil-like creature affixed to the back of the television. Foundation tests have revealed that this creature is made from a mix of human, rockfish, and pig-like DNA. It only causes strange broadcasts when affixed to the back of this particular television. But that's fine. Chuck rather enjoyed the show. It gave him a lot to think about. He left the hotel a changed man a few days later, once the conference was finally over, and gave it a glowing review. It was not long after he'd returned home that he began to notice the changes taking place. Nothing extreme at first, just gaining some weight, and then, a little stranger, he began to develop a purple rash that just wouldn't go away. As the rash worsened, it seemed to take on almost a floral pattern. Chuck didn't mind. If ever you asked him, he'd just murmur something about ascending. Then the changes got worse. A television-shaped protrusion made from bone began to grow in Chuck's stomach. His intestines became rickety porcelain pipes. His liver turned into a plush, well-fluffed pillow. His muscles began to take on a similar quality to the aramid fibers in the walls of room 710. But still, he didn't mind. As he got bigger and bigger, he didn't mind. As his organs and bones transformed into furniture inside him, he didn't mind. He didn't even mind when his body got so large that it formed a roughly cube-like shape. In fact, he couldn't be happier. He was just like that room, that beautiful, wonderful room. Just like the man on the television said, he was now one with the accommodation. And he couldn't be happier. He'd never much enjoyed being a human anyway. Such is the fate of everyone who stays in SCP-2432 eventually. You'll love the room so much that eventually, you'll start emulating it. Sure, that may seem frightening to you now, but don't worry. On the other end of the transformation, you'll be much more accommodating. You're right in the middle of one of the hottest summers on record. The days are filled with bright, scorching sun and searing heat, and you've been laying around with your air conditioning on full blast just to try and cool yourself off. Sadly, it's not really working, and the heat is becoming way too much. But then you remember there's this married couple that lives near you, with no kids, and they happen to have a swimming pool in their yard. Normally they keep to themselves, they'd never let you use their pool. But they've gone out of town for a few days. Besides, the heat is killing you. You're sure that the neighbors wouldn't mind if you just took a quick dip, as long as you clean up after yourself. They probably wouldn't even notice you were even there. Cautiously, you make your way to their house. It's an unremarkable place similar to most of the other houses in this suburb of New Mexico. After checking that there's nobody else around, you climb the 2-meter-high cinder block wall that stands around the back garden. As you drop to your feet, sweaty and panting from the unrelenting summer heat, you see it. The pool. Your salvation. Water never looks so appealing. Immediately, you step barefoot across the sun-scorched tiles and sit on the edge, legs in the water. It's cool and refreshing, perfect for a day as hot as today. You're already changed and wearing your swim trunks, so it doesn't take long for you to paddle out to the middle of the pool, letting that chilled, clean water cool you off. As you're taking a dip, you notice the pool's jets turning on automatically. It's a little bit odd, but you shrug it off. That couple clearly shelled out for a pool with a lot of fancy bells and whistles. But extra features aren't why you're here. You came because if you didn't, then you could have melted under all that sunlight. Floating on the surface of the water, you relax with your arms behind your head and close your eyes. You don't have time to realize that coming here was a mistake. Instead, you start to feel relaxed, so calm, so tranquil. You're one with the water around you now. It's almost as though you could just disappear. So, you do. The police never find any trace of you. Everyone else simply writes it off as a random disappearance. There's not even so much as a scrap of your body left in the pool, just the clear, clean water. Why? Because the swimming pool you decided to take a cooling dip in wasn't an ordinary pool. It was SCP-242. But don't worry, you won't be the last to make that costly mistake. What you didn't know is that the married couple who live in that house are secretly a pair of SCP Foundation doctors. The house isn't even theirs. The Foundation procured it after the former owner, a retired out-of-state landlord, strangely vanished. He had been struggling to find anyone to rent the place, so he eventually decided to give up on the property game and move in there himself. After 3 days, he was never seen again. Now that house has only one rule that must be followed above all else. Do not swim in the pool. SCP-242 is, at least to the untrained eye, just an average swimming pool. A decent 9 meters in length, 4.5 wide, and it holds around 53,000 liters of sterile pool water. Like we mentioned before, it's even got some nifty features like water jets, a dual waterfall, and a built-in vacuum unit for sucking out any impurities. And we mean any impurities. You see, SCP-242 does go by another name, the self-cleaning pool. And while that might not sound as foreboding or dramatic as the Scarlet King or the Wendigo Skull or the horrifying nasty dude of ultimate badness, okay, we made that last one up, we can assure you that you don't ever want to suffer the fate of taking a swim in this pool. There was an incident a while ago, recorded by the Foundation through a secret hidden camera. The house where SCP-242 can be found had been left vacant for a time, and once again some opportunists decided to take advantage of the empty swimming pool. This time it was a couple, a man and a woman in their early 20s. They climbed up the back wall, undressed, and even stole a couple of plastic inflatable rafts from a shed in the house's backyard. The water jets switched themselves on, startling the girl, but her boyfriend told her not to worry. The filter to clean the pool was probably just on an automatic timer, right? Surely it wouldn't have been anything to worry about. After swimming together for around 24 minutes, the couple both agreed that the water felt warm, tingly even. Both of them climbed onto their rafts, eventually falling asleep while still holding each other's hands. But almost half an hour after the jets had started, something caused the two rafts to burst. The couple awoke, startled by the loud pop of the splitting inflatables and being plunged back into the water. The pool around them immediately began frothing violently, deep red streams of blood swirling through the water as the couple screamed in fear and agony. Both of them tried to desperately swim to the edge, hoping to leave the pool and get to safety. But unfortunately, that plan didn't work. Before they could reach the edge, the man and the woman were pulled under the surface of the raging water, their limbs thrashing as they still tried in vain to escape. Eventually, they vanished under the crimson, bloody water. The frothing slowly began to calm, and the red in the pool dissipated, once again becoming clear after 48 seconds. The couple were never seen again, and a cover story was leaked to the press by the SCP Foundation 2 weeks after they went missing. According to them, the pair had eloped together somewhere in Mexico. If only. That sounds a lot nicer than what actually happened to them. So this swimming pool clearly has some anomalous properties, that much is obvious. But what exactly are those properties? How exactly does SCP-242 work? Is it an interdimensional gateway that drags people to a nasty alternate universe if they spend too long swimming in it? Or is the swimming pool itself a sentient carnivorous creature that lures humans in only to devour them? Maybe the water is teeming with invisible flesh-eating piranhas that can strip the meat from the bone in a matter of seconds. Well, good guesses all around, but actually, it's none of these. It's unclear what causes the pool's anomalous effects. It could be a property that is completely unique to the water contained in SCP-242. Or maybe it's down to the exact shape and measurements of the pool itself. It could even be a combination of both. But whatever the cause, the result is always the same. When any object, substance, or even living organism is placed in SCP-242, it will be entirely rewritten on a molecular level. The genetic and atomic structure will fall apart, and the subject will be transmuted into sterile water. In fact, not just clean water, but water that remains sterile even when removed from the pool. If you took a cup of SCP-242's water and mixed something like food coloring into it, the food coloring would not be absorbed into the water, instead staying as one non-miscible bubble. This process doesn't happen instantly, though. It can vary depending on how contaminated or complex the substance placed in SCP-242 is. For example, water sampled from a nearby river was sterilized and purified by the pool in about 7 minutes. A sample of stagnant pond water riddled with various diseases and germs took 11 minutes longer. What about 50,000 liters of coal tar? Well, that one took a little longer, 12 long days to be exact, but was still turned into pure sterile water. And as for a living human being, maybe ask that couple that took a dip in the self-cleaning pool. The Foundation is naturally fascinated with the pool, and after extensive examination, They have determined that SCP-242 doesn't seem to have been intentionally designed for the specific anomalous function it performs. The components of SCP-242 beyond the pool itself, the filter, the vacuum, the pipes, none of these parts nor anything about the swimming pool's design appear to be responsible for disintegrating matter until only water remains. You might have noticed that in the case of the ill-fated couple who took a swim in SCP-242, the water jets and waterfall features switched themselves on automatically before the pair's grim demise. Somehow these features are able to activate without the need for electricity, as disconnecting the pool from a power source will not stop the jets and waterfall from coming on once a non-water substance is placed into SCP-242. The same goes for the pool vacuum, which apparently cannot be jammed or malfunction, even when the bottom of the pool is awash with viscous liquids like that coal tar. The vacuum will continue to operate as normal, scrubbing away at the floor of SCP-242. The one part of the self-cleaning pool that doesn't work as you would expect is the water filtration system. There is never any water being cycled into the pool nor out of it. As a matter of fact, the pipes connecting to the filtration system have all been removed. Then again, who needs a filtration system when your backyard swimming pool can just spontaneously reduce anything to clean water? But that raises another frightening thought. Everything that the pool has ever taken and converted is still in there. Animals, objects, people, just swimming around you. Perhaps if they could still think, they'd scream and shout and tell you to get away, to run while you still can. But the second your skin touches the water, you're destined to be with them, forever and ever and ever. It's enough to send a liquid chill down your spine. Okay, so if it's not the actual physical pool that causes these anomalous effects, that must mean it's something in the water, right? Perhaps some microscopic flesh-devouring microbe, or some ancient curse that was placed on the water before it was used to fill up the pool. Surely if you took a cup of water out of SCP-242, it would still break down structures on a molecular level, leaving only more sterile water. Well, the researchers working at the SCP Foundation thought much of the same and conducted a series of tests to determine the exact properties of SCP-242's water. One test involved submerging 2 D-Class test subjects, each wearing an atmospheric dive suit, into SCP-242. The goal was to determine if it was safe to consume the water from SCP-242 while both inside and outside of the pool. Test Subject A was lowered into the water and instructed to drink from a metal straw by their mouth. The eyepieces of their goggles were blacked out, so they couldn't see what they were drinking from. Subject B filled a barrel with the same water from SCP-242 and then was made to put on an atmospheric dive suit, but instructed to stay out of the pool. Test Subject A was told to drink directly from the pool, remarking that the water was warm and had a bit of a noticeable chemical aftertaste, but was otherwise normal. Then Test Subject B drank some of the same water from the barrel. Apparently it was cool and tasted of, well, nothing, just like water usually does. After a moment more of drink, Subject A began belching, finding that they had uncontrollable gas. The water had begun to feel warmer, stinging the subject's mouth, while for Subject B, the water from the barrel stayed cool and refreshing. The Foundation doctors overseeing the experiment instructed Test Subject A to keep drinking, which they did until it felt even hotter to the taste. One of the D-Class's fillings even fell out, and eventually the structural integrity of Subject A's dive suit failed, presumably disintegrated by the water from SCP-242. After a few muffled screams and gurgling noises, Test Subject A wasn't heard from again, and we can all probably guess why. As for Subject B, they kept drinking from the barrel, suffering no adverse effects, even after 17 long hours. There were no noticeable psychological or physical changes. Even their urine showed no traces of abnormality. The water from SCP-242 left in the barrel evaporated as normal, leaving behind no residue or any indicator as to why taking the water out of the pool made it safer to drink than the same water in the pool. Perhaps the moral of the story is to just be careful where you choose to take a swim. Otherwise, it could be your last. It was just an ordinary night at Site-19, and Dr. Smith was hard at work in his office. The overhead light was just about ready to give out, the bulb dim and flickering. but there was no one available to change it at the moment, so he would just make do. Besides, he only had a little bit of work left to finish. Hunched over his desk, eyes bleary and head aching from too many hours of staring at a screen, he was ready to wrap up this report and finally get home for some well-deserved rest. The constant anxiety of working with some of the scariest monsters in the world was one thing, but the hours spent writing paperwork on the monsters was an altogether different kind of terrifying. Most of the research staff had left for the night, and only Dr. Smith and the usual security team remained in the building. There was no sound except the click of his fingers on the keys, his occasional exhausted sigh, and the infrequent sound of footsteps in the hall outside as a security officer made his rounds. Dr. Smith leaned back in his chair, stretching his arms over his head and feeling his back crack. Almost done. He recalled dimly a thermos of tea he had left on the shelf behind him. Perhaps that would be the kick he needed to finish this work up and get home to his bath, his books, and his pet cat, Roger. He swiveled his chair around, preparing to stand up and retrieve the thermos when he suddenly came face to face with a nightmare. There, less than an inch from him, was a smooth, featureless face, black as the night and devoid of any expression. It was hunched over, its face peering into him, despite not having any eyes itself. Without a sound, without so much as a creak of the door, this thing had come into his office and appeared behind him, waiting for him to turn around and see it. Dr. Smith let out a shriek of terror, knocking his chair over as he scrambled to get away from the intruder. His heart pounding in his ears, he tore past the dark figure, yanking open the door to his office and taking off running down the hall. He called out for help, for someone, anyone to come. Several security personnel heard his cries and rushed to see what had happened. They found a shivering Dr. Smith babbling about a demon in his office and repeating, "It doesn't have a face," over and over again. Once he had calmed down and finally been given that cup of tea, Dr. Smith was informed that as stressful as that encounter might have been, he was never really in any danger. We don't have another SCP-173 on our hands here, thankfully. This statue isn't murderous or even violent. To the best of our observational ability, we've determined that this particular surprisingly mobile statue is just kind of a jerk. SCP-650, nicknamed the Startling Statue, is a stylized black statue of a humanoid figure, standing at 167 centimeters tall. It has no hands or facial features, its arms extending in rounded points and its face and head a smooth surface like that of a mannequin. When the statue is dormant, or at least resting and waiting for its next chance to move, it stands straight and reaches upwards, head tilted up as if its non-existent eyes are watching the sky. Attempts to determine the materials of the statue is made of have proved inconclusive. Some tests show an impossibly large combination of different materials, where other tests came back with no matches for any recognized materials at all. If no one is observing the statue, it will move to a place immediately behind whoever is in the room with it, switching its pose to a more threatening one. It moves silently, and no one has been able to capture evidence of its method of locomotion. All that is known is that it does in fact move, and it always appears extremely close to the subject of its interest in order to provoke a strong flight or fight reaction. The statue seems to have no interest in harming those it frightens, never touching or directly interacting with anyone. It only seems interested in startling its victims, if you can even call them victims. It can be unpleasant to be unexpectedly frightened like that, sure, but you get the same experience at most Halloween attractions or horror movies, and people pay good money for those. Several trials were conducted in order to determine the statue's pattern of behavior. In a trial, an SCP Foundation agent was assigned to stand in the statue's containment unit and watch the object for a period of time. When prompted by a researcher in another room speaking to them via radio, they were ordered to look away from the statue. Once cleared to look at the statue again, they were ordered to look around the room and report where it went and what it was doing. In most of the experiments, the statue appeared directly behind the personnel, angled with its arms reaching towards them and its head glaring down at them, as if about to attack. In nearly every trial, the statue hit the same position, and the agent looking at it was startled to the point of screaming. There was even talk of cutting footage of all the screams together into a video that would be shown at the company Christmas party. However, in 3 cases, the statue adopted a different pose as well as a position in the room, much to the surprise and confusion of the team conducting the experiments. When Agent Dunn was assigned to observe the statue, he was asked to close his eyes for 5 seconds and wait for SCP-650 to move. When he opened his eyes, the first thing he did was whirl around and look behind him, having heard about the results of the previous tests. However, when he turned to face the statue, there was nothing there. He turned back around to his original stance, preparing to radio command and tell them the statue was gone, when he let out a yelp of surprise. There at the table, in the corner several feet away, was the statue. It was lying on the table with its arms behind its head, as if relaxing, with the area considered to be its face turned directly towards Dunn. Unsettled by the surprise and definitely uncomfortable with how the statue seemed to be looking at him, he left the room without another word. At another point in the trials, Agent Riley pulled the short straw and was told to enter 650's containment. She stood in the center of the room and stared at the statue in front of her for a long period of time. When given the command, she closed her eyes and waited for a duration of 30 seconds. Much like Agent Dunn, her first instinct on opening her eyes was to turn around and look behind her, ready to see the statue there. Instead, however, it was sitting on a chair at the other end of the room, the points where its hands should be neatly folded in its lap. Its body was facing away from Agent Riley, but even though she was looking at what could have easily been the back of the statue's head, she later reported the distinct sense that it was looking at her. Though she didn't scream like her colleagues had when it was their turn to watch the statue, she confessed to feeling an overwhelming sense of unease, and her hands would not stop shaking for the next several hours. These 2 instances of the statue adopting a casual posture and keeping its distance from its observers were bizarre, but the final break from the statue's usual behavior was the strangest of them all. Agent Cho was sent into SCP-650's containment and told to stand with his back against the wall of his choice. The plan was to determine what the statue would do if its unusual favorite position, just behind the observer, was no longer an option. If there was no space behind Agent Cho, then the statue could not turn up there. Once he was settled into his spot and had been watching the statue for several minutes, Agent Cho closed his eyes for exactly 1 minute. When he opened them, he immediately scanned the room to see where the statue had gone. It was not at the table or the chair, nor was it standing in its original place in front of him. Finally, he spotted it. The statue was huddled in the corner of the room, curled up in an approximation of the fetal position. Its head was down, and its arms were held up in front of its face as if trying to protect itself. Though he could not explain why, Agent Cho got a distinct impression that the statue was afraid. His stomach dropped at the sight, and he would later admit to his supervisor that he briefly thought about trying to comfort SCP-650 somehow. The impulse passed, but Cho was left with a mixture of anxiety and guilt, as if he had done something wrong and upset the statue. The sensation did not pass until he was out of the room. It is not entirely clear why the statue chose these alternative poses during these particular experiments. The prevailing theory among the research team is that these are simply other tools in its arsenal, methods that it can use to elicit a strong reaction from a person who is less likely to be startled by its usual trick. Following the incident with Dr. Smith, SCP-650 was upgraded from Safe Class to Euclid Class. Just to clarify for people in the back, Euclid Class SCPs are not necessarily considered to be dangerous, but require more effort to contain than objects classified as safe. Most SCPs that display autonomy or independent thought but are not overtly hostile towards humanity are classified as Euclid. Along with its updated status, special containment procedures have been employed in order to keep this startling statue from making any more surprise escapes. SCP-650 is to be stored in a locked room, 4 meters by 4 meters. It is to be kept under constant surveillance by at least 3 personnel at any given time, standing so that the SCP and at least one of the observers are visible to them at all times. They are allowed to watch the statue remotely via security camera, as long as they remain focused on the SCP. This method is only to be employed in case of emergency. A great deal of the Foundation's budget was dedicated to maintaining up-to-date containment facilities for SCP-650, as demanded in a note from Dr. Smith in the official file for SCP-650. The note reads,
"I don't give a flying rat about the budget. Keep this damn thing contained. Turning around in a dim office to see this thing a half-inch away from your nose is guaranteed to take years from your life. And given what we deal with, we don't have many to spare."
So, what does the startling statue want? Why does it use its power of mobility to scare people but never do anything beyond that? No one is certain, and the Foundation has too many other fires to put out to bother looking further into a clearly benign entity. Unfortunately, there are questions about SCP-650 that will never be answered, and there is so much about it we will never know. One thing is for sure though, if you find yourself alone in a room with an unsettling statue, you had better keep an eye on it, just in case.
Boo! Well, hello there, boys and ghouls. We hope we didn't startle you too hard there. It's only us, your good old friends at SCP Explained. We all love a little fright now and then, don't we? After all, that would explain our fascination with the morbid tales of the SCP Foundation. Rotten old men who can walk through walls and tear you limb from limb in their own private hells. Nightmarish psychic diseases that turn anyone who touches them into a horrible abomination. Evil masks that kill you and take over your body, using it to do acts of great cruelty until you melt down into black goo. Oh? You're not scared of those. You think you're so tough, so prepared for anything that even those anomalous beings of pure terror can't break through the impenetrable shell of your bravery? Well, I suppose we better bring out the big guns then. Just remember when you're huddled in the corner, bones rattling in fear, that you brought this on yourself. After all, there's no entity quite as good as inspiring screams as SCP-2006. So please stay a while and find out why this one's called Too Spooky. We're sorry you had to hear that, but you really can't blame us for having a little theatricality with this one. In fact, having a good grasp of theatricality is actually essential to everyone dealing with SCP-2006. Forget gunplay, rituals, and mind games. SCP-2006 requires Foundation-subsidized acting lessons in order to work on his containment, which, even as Foundation containment methods go, is pretty darn strange. When you got into this line of work, you probably expected you'd be in high-intensity battles with SCP-682, or attending conferences on how to best repel the menace of the Scarlet King, not acting out scenes from A Streetcar Named Desire with Dr. Bright. But believe us, it's important work. As they'll probably tell you at these classes, there are no small parts, only small actors. You won't spend time at these sessions perfecting Shakespearean soliloquies. Instead, you'll be adopting a much narrower focus, learning how to properly act and express fear. The more convincingly scared you can appear, the better. Because when it comes to SCP-2006, your job and potentially even your life depend on it. Plus, it's the only time that peeing your pants and collapsing on the job may actually get you a raise, rather than just a series of strange looks from your coworkers. When you pass that course with flying colors, you'll finally be ready to actually come face to face with the Prince of Nightmares himself, SCP-2006. By this point, you've had it drilled into your head so many times that you could never forget it. For the love of God, whatever this thing does, you act scared. Don't stonewall, don't smile, and whatever you do, don't laugh. Laughing at SCP-2006 is probably the fastest way you can get demoted to swabbing feces in SCP-173's chamber. If you know what's good for you, you'll dial up that fear. When the big day comes, you're sent into SCP-2006's airtight containment chamber with a special package. That time of the month has come once again. You need to deliver the goods. You spot a television in the corner first, still on but tuned to static. You're pondering what a waste of electricity this is when SCP-2006, who'd been hiding behind an armchair, decided to finally strike. You barely had time to realize what was going on when a large, dark shape suddenly blotted out your vision. It was over 6 feet tall and looked like a man in an exceedingly cheap gorilla costume, except with a goofy diving helmet with what looked like TV antennas on top. It waved its arms wildly as if to hammer home the point that, yes, this really was happening, and you should be terrified by it. The creature bellowed, "Fear me, mortal! I am the mighty Roman! Cower in fear!"
At that moment, your weeks of training kicked in almost like a reflex. You let out an ear-piercing shriek and dropped down to the floor, desperately crawling away from the goofy-looking creature.
Eyes wide, breathing heavy, moments frantic and defensive. You gather yourself up in one of the room's corners and curl into a ball, covering your face. Imbuing your voice with a well-practiced quiver, you say, "Please, mighty Roman, don't hurt me. I have so much to live for, just please let me go." The monster holds a quote-unquote menacing pose for a few seconds longer before slackening into a joyful laugh. It even extended a rubbery gorilla paw to help you up. Of course, you hesitate for a few seconds, gazing fearfully, waiting for it to say, "Ha ha ha, it's just me, Doc. I got you pretty good, didn't I?" And as far as he knows, yes, he did. You're sure to never slip into the body language of comfort. It's utterly vital that SCP-2006 truly believes that he's scary to you, even though he looks like a terrible monster costume from an even worse low-budget B-movie. Though specifically, the Ro-Man, the monster from the 1950 trash classic Robot Monster. You tell SCP-2006 that you're here with some more stimulus material for him, and hand him a plastic bag. When he asks you what you've brought him this time, you tell him you can't even look at it. If you so much as laid eyes on it, you'd slip into a terrified state of catatonia. You'd honestly rather look at 096 than look at what you've brought him today. SCP-2006 cocked his head to the side and asked, "What's 096? Oh, no. The terror that was fake before wasn't quite so fake now. You'd slipped up, buddy. And if you didn't come up with a good save quickly, you would be in deep trouble." You gulp and take a quick breath, trying to compose yourself before saying that 096 is just another movie. One that's not nearly as scary as the one you've prepared for him. It seemed to satisfy him, so you internally breathe a sigh of relief and turn to make your exit. You've just left SCP-2006 with a DVD copy of the 1977 classic Deathbed, The Bed That Eats, a somewhat obscure horror movie about an evil bed created by a demon. That should tide the eccentric anomaly over for another month. So, you're probably wondering, what actually just happened? What's the logic? What are the connections between this strange sequence of events we all just witnessed? While it may seem bizarre now, once you know more about SCP-2006, it'll all make sense. We can't promise it'll actually seem any less bizarre by the end, though. SCP-2006 is a Keter Class shape-shifting anomaly. Its default form is a floating sphere of about 50 centimeters in diameter. Not exactly terrifying. And this is actually a big problem for SCP-2006, as the mischievous anomaly has an almost compulsive desire to scare people. Not to physically harm them in any way, just give them a good old-fashioned spook. He's shown to be pretty much indestructible, so neutralization is off the table. You may be thinking, he seems like a pretty harmless goofball, why would anyone want to neutralize him? And, well, we'll answer that one later. Back to SCP-2006's favorite hobby, scaring people. While 2006 seems to practically live off of giving a good scare, he's thankfully no Pennywise. 2006 has no inherent knowledge of what scares humans, and thus has to learn what scares humans from external sources. This unique weakness to SCP-2006's ability is one the Foundation has discovered as an ingenious method of exploiting for its containment. They simply keep SCP-2006 misinformed on what people actually find scary, tricking it to make sure that it's always hopelessly inept at its hobby. Their method of achieving this is twofold. Firstly, they give SCP-2006 a monthly supply of the worst horror movies you can imagine. True bargain bucket B-movie schlock. Troll 2, Leprechaun in the Hood, Birdemic, Shock and Terror, a personal favorite, The Ginger Dead Man, The Beast of Yucca Flats, Plan 9 from Outer Space, a runner-up for me, The Creeping Terror, The Man Without a Body, Manos, The Hands of Fate, Track of the Moon Beast, and of course, the seminal classic, Iga, a movie about an evil caveman being unfrozen and terrorizing Palm Springs. Movies like this are a perfect mechanism for tricking SCP-2006, because it sees the characters in the movies reacting with fear to the terrible, hokey monsters rampaging across backlots and sound stages, and starts to believe that these B-movie beasts are actually scary. That's the first part of the trick, and you've probably already figured out the second half. The Foundation makes sure that any employees who interact with SCP-2006 in any capacity must play the part of appearing actually, genuinely frightened by it. This 1-2 punch of trickery keeps SCP-2006 successfully bamboozled. As such, despite being a creature largely based around creating fear, albeit in a more friendly, playful way than most anomalies, it's seen as a joke among staff members. It
It wouldn't be surprising to hear that different staff members took turns laughing at surveillance footage, or that the latest site Halloween party, a few drunken researchers tried to trick SCP-2006 into assuming the form of David S. Pumpkins from Saturday Night Live. I believe they also received angry phone calls from Tom Hanks' agent the next day. As you could probably gather, developing such an unimpressed attitude to containing anomalies with the SCP Foundation is never a good thing. After all, even some of the most innocent-looking ones can hide surprisingly dark secrets. Dr. Randall Owings, the site director for Site 118, where SCP-2006 is held, released a stern memorandum to everyone working in 2006's proximity. It read, "I've been getting reports of some of the lax behavior regarding SCP-2006. Many personnel have been heard laughing at SCP-2006 during surveillance when it watches a new movie, or when it attempts to scare individuals. Some personnel have been heard questioning why SCP-2006 is classified as a Keter entity. I am here to remind you that a Keter entity is a Keter entity, regardless of how innocuous it may seem. No, SCP-2006 is not a rampaging demigod, nor is it a regenerating super lizard. However, it possesses the same level of danger as any other Keter that the Foundation has contained. Think of SCP-2006's purpose. It wishes to scare people. Imagine what would happen if SCP-2006 broke containment and found out what really scared people. Imagine if it saw the horror and fear of war, or the concepts of paranoia or phobias common to each and every human being. Imagine if it found the true horror of a nuclear holocaust or an XK class scenario. Now couple that with an entity that possesses shape-shifting abilities with no known limits, and you'll understand why it's classified as Keter. All personnel mentioned above have been suitably disciplined. I do not want to hear about this again. SCP-2006 is only as harmless as the Foundation's containment procedures allow it to be. It's why it can never know about other anomalies, or any actually frightening works of fiction. If ever SCP-2006 became aware of the true sources of human fear, there would be no stopping it, seeing as the creature appears to be indestructible. Like many of the anomalies kept under lock and key by the SCP Foundation, it is a ticking time bomb that one little mistake could turn into an utter catastrophe. Terrible movies and theatrical staff members need to keep SCP-2006 in the dark about what actually scares us, because beyond that, the only limit to the danger of SCP-2006 is the human imagination. And that, my friends, is a very spooky thought indeed.
An SCP Foundation researcher sits at a table inside of a standard containment cell. These are often dangerous places to be, especially when the SCP you're supposed to be studying is one that you can't see. The researcher is taking notes, unsure of exactly what is going to happen next. He can hear the sounds of knives scraping behind, of flesh sizzling and searing from high heat. He braces himself as a burst of heat hits the back of his head, as if a fireball has erupted. An object floats through the air and settles in front of him on the table. It's a plate of food, and it looks delicious. It may surprise you to learn that there is no rule that the SCP Foundation must deal exclusively with violent and vicious creatures. Not every SCP held in containment shares the same malevolence and contempt for humanity as SCP-682, or the world-ending threat posed by the likes of SCP-2317. Some, perhaps not many, but some, are benign and might even seem outwardly friendly. But you'd still be taking a huge risk to assume that anything contained by the SCP Foundation is completely harmless. Such is the case with SCP-5031. As per the Foundation's containment procedures, this quasi-humanoid, meaning it appears to have some vaguely human features, is held in an airtight cell that is regularly checked by Foundation personnel on a bi-weekly basis. SCP-5031 has no need for regular nutrition or regular interactions from staff. The trick with SCP-5031 is not being eaten by it, since though it doesn't need food, it does still hunt and consume anything it encounters, human or otherwise. Avoiding being eaten is hard enough with creatures that can actually be seen, but like so many other creatures the Foundation keeps contained, SCP-5031 has developed an almost perfect defense mechanism, which is when observed, it will literally cease to exist. Some might choose to refer to this as a quantum lock. However, it is worth noting that traces left by SCP-5031 still remain observable when the creature has temporarily disappeared. For example, trails of blood and scratch marks left behind by SCP-5031 still exist when the SCP itself does not. Naturally, this makes both avoiding the creature and capturing it using cameras difficult. However, when SCP-5031's existence ceases, it still casts a shadow. From this, researchers have been able to determine several of the creature's physical traits. Based on its silhouette, it has been deduced that SCP-5031 levitates about half a meter above ground level, sports an abnormally small necklace head atop an elongated torso, approximately 1.9 meters long, with 3 sets of spindly lower arms that branch outwards. Using these arms and its loosely hanging body, SCP-5031 will lower itself to hunt any human or animal that draws near to it, and uses the blade-like tail to cut up food. Perhaps the most interesting facet of SCP-5031 beyond its defensive capabilities and apparent physical attributes are the series of 9 tests conducted by senior researcher Stanley Huxtable. Appalled by the conditions that the creature was being kept in, Huxtable took over the role of HCL supervisor for SCP-5031. Having grown increasingly frustrated and empathetic towards the creature, listening to its screams from inside its iron containment unit, Huxtable devised a series of tests to introduce SCP-5031 to various different stimuli as a way to better understand the creature, and hopefully keep it contained in a way that didn't seem to cause so much suffering. It's worth remembering that the SCP Foundation makes its mission to be cold, not cruel, in performing their duties to protect normality, and many of the researchers and staff are just as capable of having empathy for creatures as you might for a stray animal at a shelter. The first of Huxtable's tests involved installing speakers in SCP-5031's cell, through which a variety of different ambient and popular pieces of music were played to see if they had any effect on reducing the creature's stress. By judging SCP-5031's stress levels based on how much it screamed when compared to normal, Huxtable was able to determine how to best use music to calm the creature. SCP-5031 seemed to convey higher levels of stress when listening to Morning Forest, Deep Grotto, and Seaside Paradise ambience, as well as the best of late 60s British rock band Jethro Tull. However, the best of Mozart, Enya, Kiss, and Ben Folds produced dramatically different results, decreasing SCP-5031's apparent stress. Following this test, senior researcher Huxtable compiled a playlist featuring SCP-5031's favorite music. Over time, the stress-reducing effects of music on SCP-5031 seemed to decrease, but keeping the playlist on shuffle seemed to keep the creature consistently calmer than it had been previously. The next test involved introducing inanimate objects into SCP-5031's enclosure to monitor its reactions and how its stress levels were affected. When a softball was thrown into the enclosure, SCP-5031 immediately sliced the ball in two with its tail in one swift motion. A similar result occurred when researchers threw the creature a basketball, which was quickly punctured and sliced open by SCP-5031's tail. Its stress levels first seemed to diminish when the creature was offered a bowling ball, which it rolled around the enclosure and then later knocked it against a second bowling ball. However, when one of the balls chipped, rendering it unable to roll properly, SCP-5031's stress increased dramatically until a replacement was offered. Researcher Huxtable noted that SCP-5031 seemed to possess a similar level of motor skills to an average human toddler, with similarly explosive emotional reactions to match. Next, when given the choice between 2 food sources at opposite ends of its enclosure, SCP-5031 seemed to gravitate towards higher quality food, most notably favored cooked rotisserie chickens over animal carcasses. It even chose this option over a live chicken, using its tail to cut its food into more manageable bite-sized portions, rather than ripping its meat with its hands or teeth like many of its fellow SCPs. Researcher Huxtable recorded these findings and highlighted that, even though SCP-5031 didn't need to eat in order to survive, providing the creature with food of a better quality marginally reduced its stress. Senior researcher Huxtable next attempted to test SCP-5031's coexistence with other living subjects, each time making sure that the creature had been adequately fed to avoid any unseemly incidents. First, a live chicken was introduced. SCP-5031 rolled its bowling ball at high speed towards the chicken, increasing both its and the chicken's stress levels and inadvertently killing the chicken in the process. When a second chicken was introduced, SCP-5031 gently rolled a basketball towards it, but ceased any further engagement after the chicken squawked from being hit by the ball. Next to be introduced into the enclosure was a blindfolded D-Class staff member, who was instructed to sit down and roll the basketball towards SCP-5031. After doing so for several minutes, the creature began to approach the D-Class subject, who was instructed to remove their blindfold to cease the creature's existence and prevent any potentially deadly incidents. Finally, researcher Huxtable had another Class D engage in a game of catch with SCP-5031 while facing away from the creature. This test proceeded successfully, and senior researcher Huxtable remarked how SCP-5031's motor skills were improving, albeit gradually and with some gentle encouragement. Through Huxtable's tests, the creature was learning. The next test, focused on teaching SCP-5031 linguistic symbols, utilized LCD displays and buttons connected to a food dispenser. One display showed an image of a rock, and the other an image of a rotisserie chicken. After some brief probing, SCP-5031 was quickly able to understand that pressing the button under the correct display would dispense a rotisserie chicken for it to eat. The creature was later able to adapt when, the following day, the screen displays and materials dispensed were swapped, and then later set to swap at random intervals. When additional rock dispensing stations were introduced, this time displaying the word rock as opposed to an image, SCP-5031 was able to determine which station dispensed chicken through a process of elimination. Whenever the functions and displays were swapped, SCP-5031 would find whichever displayed the word chicken to receive its food. The final phase of this test presented SCP-5031 with a single station, displaying the word chicken, but with a button that would remain inactive unless the creature spelled out the same word with a collection of lettered blocks it was provided with. After some initial confusion and frustrations as to why the button would not dispense food when pressed, SCP-5031 was able to assemble the word correctly, not only activating the button and dispensing food, but proving to researcher Huxtable that the creature was capable of learning language. Huxtable continued to test the creature, encouraging it to spell words using lettered blocks as a method of communicating. By increasing SCP-5031's vocabulary and the amount of human interaction it received, senior researcher Huxtable observed that SCP-5031 was gradually learning to sing, albeit non-verbally, as well as to juggle with its 6 hands, and was even communicating its food preferences and dish pairings. Later, another Class D, D-52125, was introduced to SCP-5031's enclosure to aid in further testing. Through D-52125's instructions, the creature quickly learned to draw using crayons, and created artworks depicting itself, its newfound friend D-52125, researcher Huxtable, a cat, and a rotisserie chicken. SCP-5031's new creative side didn't stop there though, as the creature quickly learned to play chopsticks in only 2 days once a piano was introduced into the enclosure. SCP-5031 even managed to start creating its own original, admittedly crude, compositions. Next, a spice rack was placed inside the creature's cell, and D-52125 demonstrated how to season meat. This proved to be SCP-5031's new favorite hobby, as it spent the next 3 days experimenting with different combinations of foods and spices, using its letter blocks to request more garlic powder. Interestingly, the creature only created artwork or music when D-52125 was present, but seemed to thoroughly enjoy its experimentation with food when left alone. Following this development, senior researcher Huxtable devised a new test for SCP-5031, providing the creature with cooking utensils and using D-52125 to demonstrate. 5031 was shown how to prepare a variety of different dishes, from hamburgers and tacos to Mongolian beef, steak, clam chowder, and profiteroles. In addition to a small peanut allergy, this 8th test revealed SCP-5031 to be a phenomenal chef, possessing culinary skills far beyond the average person. The creature quickly and enthusiastically embraced its newfound talents, concocting its very own brand new recipes, with D-52125 even volunteering to be the first to taste test 5031's dishes. It was shortly after this test that SCP-5031 spoke its very first word. And it should come as no surprise that the word was salt. Naturally, Senior Researcher Huxtable was very proud of the progress the creature had made with its development. The final test almost seemed to be what the creature was born for. Over the course of 2 months, SCP-5031 was tasked with creating a full 3-course meal, which would then be served to Foundation staff for Thanksgiving. SCP-5031 not only rose to the task, but exceeded all of Researcher Huxtable's expectations, creating a meal that even Gordon Ramsay would be hard-pressed to find fault with. The creature created a first course consisting of sweet potato miso soup seasoned with turmeric. Next came a beautiful duck confit, glazed luxuriously with apple cider, and topped generously with sweet cranberry compote, paired with a side of butternut squash gnocchi and served on a bed of kale seasoned with truffle salt. The grand finale of the exquisite meal was a spiced cassava pie for dessert, complemented with the finest French vanilla ice cream and a maple hazelnut syrup. And SCP-5031 didn't stop there. The creature also debuted one of its original musical compositions to complement the decadent meal it had created. As the staff enjoyed the food, SCP-5031 performed live from its enclosure the deeply moving Piano Concerto for 6 hands, to an overwhelmingly positive response from not only Senior Researcher Huxtable, but the entire Foundation staff. As a fitting end to the creature's tale, Huxtable reported that, during the Thanksgiving banquet it had created, SCP-5031's stress levels reduced entirely. New, kinder containment measures that would keep 5031 safer but also far more contented were submitted for approval. Perhaps some of you may find it refreshing to learn that SCP-5031 isn't simply just another malicious, malevolent monster that the Foundation has to keep under lock and key for the safety of the world. Instead, SCP-5031 is a gentle, if a little frightening at first, creature that just requires careful and considered guidance instead of a cold iron cage and around-the-clock armed guards. Through testing, Senior Researcher Stanley Huxtable and his fellow Foundation staff were not only able to help the creature develop, but also found what makes it tick, and not just for the purposes of containing it. Instead, it is hoped that SCP-5031's creativity and flair for culinary and musical masterpieces can continue to thrive and grow, under the proud watch of Researcher Huxtable. Now for something from the more terrifying archives of the SCP Foundation, check out SCP-096, the Shy Guy, or SCP-106, the Old Man.